Anyway, I was wondering if we should get on the subject
Right.
of
Yes.
this.
Right. Yes. I
Uh,
mean, I'm sure people by the
I'm actually,
title up there,
yeah,
you must be waiting for what we're actually going to talk about. I might actually cut this in two. I might do that
yes,
whole sort of not Nyarlathotep and Outsider thing, and actually Nyarlathotep and the Outsider.
that worked with the kit video quite
Yeah.
well. Actually, I thought
Well,
that
people
was
can then
perfect.
take what they like, can't they? If they want to just
Yeah,
talk about, if they want to hear us talk about the subject matter without the preamble, they can go and do that.
mm,
I think that works rather well as a shtick, to be honest. To be honest. But yes, we were. I mean, you chose. We were going to do a Lovecraft retrospective, first
yes,
one in quite a while, actually. We haven't done one for a very, very long time. And you chose two of like the Lovecraft tales, really. Like those Lovecraft tales where if you ask people to name a Lovecraft story, the odds on this will be there. These two will be there somewhere.
mm, yeah. They're in all of the like big selected, or at least the outsider is. I think Nyarlathotep, uh,
Nyarlathotep.
Nyarlathotep, yeah, he
Nyarlathotep. I think that's. I think.
Nyarlathotep, yeah. I'll probably mangle his name quite often because I'll need to say it too much to carefully. And it's not a real name
No,
anyway. It's
it definitely isn't. No.
it come apparently. So I was reading on this, and apparently it comes from Lord Dunsey or
Oh.
Dunsany. Yeah, it's a combination of two of his characters'
Oh.
names. And Lovecraft just sort of mashed it
Mashed them
together
together, just made a
in homage.
portmanteau out of
Yeah,
two of them.
yeah,
Well, that I mean, a lot. I mean, those sort of writers that were accrued around Lovecraft, they did share a lot of stuff, didn't they? They shared a lot of
yeah,
notes and a lot of mythological details. That's how a lot of the extended mythology. I mean, I'm fairly certain Nyarlathotep occurs in a lot of other, like in a lot of Derleth stories as well, and a lot of a lot of people who wrote around Lovecraft.
yeah. And he appears repeatedly in Lovecraft. He appears
Oh
in
yeah.
Whisper in the Dark and The Haunter in the Dark, a lot of
Rats in the
the dark type
Walls, I
stories.
think he's in that
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
And then there are characters or entities that might conceivably be an aspect of him.
yeah. He's so amorphous. I mean, I was going to call him a shapeshifter, but I'm aware that St. Joshi actually really dislikes him being described as a shapeshifter um, because Lovecraft never explicitly actually says that he is.
No,
And
I mean it's true in a sense because he appears in lots of different forms, but I think that's more that he just has different aspects. He is one of those bizarre extra-dimensional entities, isn't he? That
yeah,
isn't singular.
I think the other thing is, and I think it's like a pet peeve of Joshi, whose opinion I would largely defer to on Lovecraft,
Mhm.
is the idea that Lovecraft had a worked out mythology
Yeah,
being kind of bunk.
which he just
Um,
yeah
yeah,
he just
and I think
didn't,
like
you know.
I think these figures recur because they're names in Lovecraft's head, but they're not
Mhm.
necessarily even referring to the same
No, it's
entities.
probably true. It's probably true. I mean, there are correspondence from Lovecraft where he says things like, "Oh, I used the same name for this because I liked it."
Yeah, and I think that like sounds very like Lovecraft. I think the idea that he had this worked out pantheon system. I
No.
think some of the earliest stories, the weird, more fairy tale-esque ones,
Hmm.
that's kind of true.
Hmm.
Like there's a sense of a broader mythology.
Hmm.
Lots of stuff about cats taking revenge on people and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I love those stories. They're completely unlike his later work and very kind of whimsical.
Oh, I love the whimsical Lovecraft ones
Yeah,
where he's just letting it go.
yeah,
He is just letting his imagination is like a prog rock album cover when he lets it go. It is so bizarre.
that's a good way to describe it. But it is, yeah, he is really strange when he does that. It's just fun. There's so much
It
fun
is,
in
isn't
those
it? I mean,
stories.
it's an odd thing to describe, you know, Lovecraft. What was it Stephen King called him? The Dark Prince of postmodern horror. Yeah, it is a strange thing, but those stories are fun.
Yeah, they are. They're very different tonally, and there's just a level of enjoyment in them. I
Hmm.
mean, they have, although this content is not always suitable for young children, they have the feeling of young children's stories sometimes in their
Hmm.
plot beats and
Yeah,
how
yeah.
they sort of take place. They're very like the kind of macabre fairy tales that I'm sure Lovecraft was reading from the 19th century. I mean,
Oh yeah, oh without a
definitely
doubt,
was
without a
reading.
doubt,
Yeah.
yeah. Taking massive inspiration from. There is almost like a, in a lot of them, there is this sort of like twisted Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz quality about them.
Yeah, it's exactly that. There's a kind of wryness to them, which you
Hmm.
really don't get like by the sort of outside Nyarlathotep
No,
period. That's largely
it becomes very earnest, doesn't it?
yeah,
It's strange. His storytelling becomes much more earnest as he goes on.
yeah. I think that's really true. I mean, and I think there's occasionally bits of humor. There's bits of humor in the music of Eric Zahn, in my opinion.
Very much, yeah, but
Um,
it's gallows,
it
isn't it? It's
is,
very sort of like it's a subtextual humor, or it's like it's dark irony.
yeah, yeah. I mean, these two stories are, to be fair, utterly humorless. Like,
Utterly
yeah,
humorless. There is no like not even a suggestion of irony or sardonism or anything like that. He is totally serious with these
yeah,
stories.
yeah. For better and worse, like he is like
Hmm.
just completely po-faced. I mean, I think like
Yeah,
the more extrav. I mean, I love The Outsider as a story. It's one of my personal favorites. Like behind
yeah.
The Color of Outer Space and the music of Eric Zahn, but still pretty high up there.
Oh, it's so
Um,
good. I mean, I reread it a few days ago, both of them, like one after the other, when I was on a long overnight at work. I read both of them together. And The Outsider is such a good story. On
yeah,
just a pure, first of all, conceptually, it's great. And then in terms of just the structure of it, it's
yeah.
wonderful.
I mean, he took that very strongly from Edgar Allan Poe in terms that
Of
that story is
course.
there's a letter where he's characteristically self-deprecatory about his
Hmm.
influences, and he says, um, "My literal though unconscious imitation of Poe at its very height," which is, I mean, unfair to be honest, because it is a really
Yeah.
well plotted story. But yeah, it's clearly got that line in it. But it's I think the problem with just comparing it to Poe though is it's so well structured. The
Hmm.
transition of the unnamed outsider protagonist, the narrator protagonist, from the reality in which he's contained into the other reality through the
I
tower.
that is my favorite bit in the whole thing.
Yeah.
The kind of strange existential inversion
Mm.
that happens.
It
It's so well communicated and brilliant. It's got this like what would be called bizarro horror now, I
yeah.
suppose. So strange, but I love it.
It's really mind bending. The first time you read of him going through that hatchway and then he's suddenly on a flat
Emerging
plane.
right
It's
into like he's climbed to the highest point in the reality that he awakens in or
mm,
that he operates in and opens a way into what seems to be this reality.
yeah,
So you've got like I mean it's a very ironically it's a very Dark Souls thing, you know, where you've got Bloodborne where you've got realities on top of realities on top
mm,
of realities all stacked together.
yeah. It's really clever and there's so much implication and suggestion that just doesn't need to be unpacked there, which I
Right.
I love. It's what I love portals generally, like magical
Hmm.
portals in stories
Oh
are
yeah.
always great. Um,
Give me that all day, any day, in any form. I'll just devour that.
yeah, going into cupboards, into paintings. It's
Hmm.
always carpets. Yes,
Carpets, obviously.
yeah. I mean, it's always a lot of fun, and it can work really well. And it's one of my favorite portals as well. Like I think
Yeah.
like it's actually one of the best, and it's so understated in the story. I mean, it's not even the crescendo moment or anything close to it.
No, it's very clever because it's kind of subtle. Like he just there's no signification of him passing through into another reality. He just opens a door,
Yeah,
doesn't it? It just climbs out.
there's a real attention to the perspective of this creature, like the naivety of the creature and the
Hmm.
sense that it has no awareness of the other reality at all that it's
Hmm.
stepping into, and it doesn't really know what our parameters of strange and normal are. You
No.
really get that by implication, which is rare for Lovecraft because Lovecraft often spells out things he doesn't need to.
Absolutely. And also, if there's something that's abhuman or inhuman, it is monstrous in intent as well as nature, isn't it? You know, it's
Yeah,
usually a monster inside as well. This guy, whatever, I mean, very cleverly, it never really defines what he is or what nature. I mean, it is obviously something undead, something abhorrent, but it's hard. There's an innocence to the character, isn't there?
yeah. It's. I mean, in this way, it's one of the reasons why I picked these two stories because they contrast with each other so completely.
Oh yeah,
Like,
well you've got the two antipodean entities, haven't you? Like
yeah,
the character, the narrator in this story, who is a monster technically, but is actually an innocent,
yeah,
doesn't really have any monster. In fact, when he at the end when he climbs through the lighted window into the party, he wants to join it,
yeah.
doesn't he? He's not. He doesn't want to harm anyone.
I mean, that's where like the irony of the poem at the beginning, the quote from
Hmm.
John Keats, really comes in because it's from
Hmm.
the Eve of Saint Agnes, and the story there is of a guy Porphyro who um, sneaks into a woman's bedchambers, and she's taking this part in this ritual around the Eve of
Oh.
Saint Agnes, and she's trying to dream her lover, and confuses him coming in
Ah.
with the dream, and then invites him into her bed, and then realizing what happened, she's completely undone because it's some kind of like medieval context. They both
Hmm.
flee together, and it's sort of suggested that they die. So there's this kind of it's a very erotically charged poem, which is odd for
Hmm.
Lovecraft to
It's
quote. Um,
yeah.
and the quote itself is great. It's like the night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests, with shade and form of witch and demon and large coffin worm, were long benightmared. And that's like
Hmm.
obviously quite apt for the story. But I think
Of course.
there are deeper resonances between the poem and the story because there's this like sense um, of longing that moves both narratives. And
Hmm.
um, it's weird because Lovecraft. I mean, I can't ever help like getting past the idea that the narrator protagonist is the monster is kind of Lovecraft.
It's kind of
Like
Lovecraft, isn't it? There is an almost autobiographical quality to this. I mean, just geographically speaking, because Lovecraft was that guy.
yeah,
Lovecraft was that monster. He was the person who was locked away from society and was sealed away often by his own inclination,
yeah.
looking out, simultaneously disgusted by society and humanity, but also longing to be part of it.
There's that line, unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness. And like there's a real sense of pathos
Hmm.
there. And when the monster quote unquote starts talking about reading books and
Hmm.
dreaming of being in those novels, like it's just really hard to not imagine that this is Lovecraft talking of his own childhood. And then that
There is
desire
a
to join
yeah.
the party, like it's
And his description of himself, I suppose, as this avatar, as this thing which is so abominable to
Mm.
human sight. I mean, that kind of refers back to certain things that his mother allegedly said of him and to him, i.e., that he was ugly, that he was unworthy, and
Absolutely.
wow,
Yeah. I mean, there was like apparently quite a lot of that because he reminded her of his father.
yes,
And the man apparently infected her with syphilis. So
right.
she wasn't a fan, to put it
No, I
mildly.
imagine she wasn't.
So it was a really messed up situation. I've read that like she would mock him in front of like guests and things like that. I don't
Hmm.
know the accuracy of that or anything, but it definitely sounded like a deeply troubled childhood and a deeply lonely,
Yes.
which is the overriding feel of this story. Like that
Oh, it's
loneliness.
desolate, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean, you almost get the impression, certainly early on, when the creature is in its own reality, that there is nothing there. There's just him.
yeah, yeah. It's absolutely barren. And there's this like painting by Zdzislaw Beksinski of this sort of dimly sighted red style creature, slightly humanoid, hiding behind a pillar. And for some reason,
Hmm.
the outsider always reminds me of that picture. It's got that kind of
I
sense of
know the one.
reality's caving in as well,
Yeah.
which,
Yes, it's almost like the reality that this entity operates in is almost post-apocalyptic, as though
yeah.
something has swept through that's destroyed everything, and this may be the last survivor
And there's this
of that
sense of
reality.
loneliness to that picture and also of shyness, which you get from the outsider really
Hmm.
strongly. Um, and and yeah, and as I say, it's like completely contrary to both like the perspective and what is being discussed in Nyarlathotep.
Right,
Like,
because in
yeah,
Nyarlathotep, Nyarlathotep's really weird, isn't it? It's a very strange story in the sense that it is not only in terms of the dynamic of the central character being completely antipodean to the outsider, but the perspective that the stories take. So the outsider is first person, and it's densely psychological. It's from the
mm,
perspectives of a very particular character who is experiencing very particular things in the immediate. Nyarlathotep draws back and gives you a sort of god's eye view almost
yeah.
of these events that are very vaguely and historically described and are actually take place over what could be decades or
Mm.
even centuries.
Because it's a prose poem, it has this like sweepingness to
Mm.
its narrative. It's very condensed, and the narrator in that, although he expresses various degrees of horror, there's a kind of disingenuousness of the narrator in that. Like the narrator is constantly saying, Nyarlathotep is this terrible monstrosity, but also I really want to like go and meet him and learn
Right.
everything.
I mean, he is like an acolyte, isn't
Yeah,
he, of Nyarlathotep, and is maybe someone like a cultist or someone to that something to that effect. Even though there is a sense that Nyarlathotep, when either released or when he emerges from beneath his pyramid or his tomb, is the agent of
yeah.
apocalypse.
There's a kind of Devil's Pact aspect to it. I mean, it's kind of it's very much like an Egyptian mummy story. Like it's
Hmm.
the risen pharaoh
Yeah.
kind of thing, and there's something slightly undead about Nyarlathotep, and but there's also this like weird subtext about Nyarlathotep being this kind of visionary, and apparently
Mm.
Nikola Tesla was like a model to some extent for
Oh,
Nyarlathotep,
wow.
and at least in this story, not probably other
Wow,
ones.
that's very interesting. So someone who was a total visionary,
Yeah.
someone who was one of the most inspired human beings who ever lived, probably.
Mm. Yeah. And I think there's this like sense of this like ambiguity that I think runs through the whole of Lovecraft's work of
Yeah,
like both attraction and repulsion to the
it's
other.
so strange, isn't it? He wants you to regard, like he insists all the way through that Nyarlathotep is abominable, that he's something awful and inspiring of madness and darkness, and yet he it's almost like he does it by accident. Lovecraft reveals himself through the language that he uses. There is a kind of like desire, isn't there? There is a fascination with the occult darkness
Mm.
of Nyarlathotep. There is like the character performs dark miracles and
Yeah.
stuff like that, you know.
It's entranced by all of this. And even the language, the prose poetry of it
Hmm.
is entranced. Like it's not in that way it's very different to the outside, which is actually very painful and tender to read. I mean, the
Yeah,
description of the creature is just so over the top.
it's
It's a
so
level of
over the top,
grotesque.
isn't it?
I took a quote actually, and it just goes, a compound of all that was unclean, uncanny, unwelcome, abnormal, and detestable, a ghoulish shade of decay, antiquity, and dissolution, dripping unwholesome revelation, bearing that which the merciful earth should hide, moldy, disintegrating, nameless, voiceless monster, carrion thing, fetid apparition, unholy abomination. Like, I don't think there's by the time he's done,
Wow.
there's not really a word left in the dictionary that
I
could
was gonna
describe something
say
bad. Um,
you'd struggle to find any more
yeah,
synonyms, really, wouldn't you?
it's kind of like one of those Nurgle books when it comes to disease, which I love, but they clearly relied heavily on the thesaurus for like
Hmm.
various descriptions of illness and its
Yeah,
effects.
Yeah, but it's the point at which the story kind of it almost falls apart, doesn't it? Because of that overuse
Yeah,
of descriptors, it almost loses all of the wonderful intimacy and tenderness that it's had up until that point.
there's a real sense of exaggeration from that, which I think is probably more a bad imitation of poem. It actually really
Mm.
starts with like the reactions of the people to him, which is like, so this is actually worth quoting as well. Like, scarcely had I crossed the sill when there descended upon the whole company a sudden and unheralded fear of hideous intensity, distorting every face and evoking the most horrible screams from almost every throat. Flight was universal, and in the clamor and panic, several fell in a swoon and were ferried away by their madly fleeing companions. Which, like, if you actually imagine it happening, would be
Right.
like ridiculous. Like
Yeah,
people
yeah.
dragging people across the floor.
It's so theatrical, isn't it? It's so. I mean, I hesitate to use the term, but kind of contrived.
Yeah, it's almost like something operatic. I do think
Yeah.
there's a sense though in all of that that like he's really trying to convey very cack-handedly just how vile this
Yes, he's
supposed to look.
desperate, isn't he? He wants you. It's something Lovecraft does quite a lot, actually, where he tries to. He really wants a degree of control over how the reader, the audience, is reacting to what he's describing.
Yeah,
He doesn't want them to react in ways that he doesn't want them to. And the result of that, ironically, is that they often do.
yeah,
They often, rather than finding what he's describing as this like epitome of hideousness, it comes across as slightly funny.
yeah. I think I think like that kind of like describing by not describing thing that Lovecraft does is much better accomplished in
Yeah,
Nyarlathotep. He you know, there's a thing about something like being a hand that isn't a hand in that, which is actually quite
yeah,
uncanny and weird and
yeah.
disconcerting. There's a lot of like those turns of phrases. Um,
Yes, where you don't. I mean, unlike the creature in The Outsider, you never really get a handle
no,
on Nyarlathotep.
no, you get the sense of this being that is actually immeasurable and
Yeah.
not encompassed.
Not of this
Yeah,
world. There's something very much. It's something that's been invited in from the outside, isn't it? Which of course is expanded in the other stories when he has many different aspects. I mean, isn't he in the extended universe? I don't know whether Lovecraft himself ever described him as this, but in the extended universe, he is like a messenger of Atzathoth, isn't he?
I think there's a sense of that in The Haunter in the Dark as well, if
Mm,
I'm right. It's been a while since I read that one, but I think there's a sense of Nyarlathotep as a kind of
like an
as a herald.
avatar, or
Yeah, yeah, like kind of in the sense that Cthulhu heralds certain things. He's a subtler
yes.
herald. He's a sort of creeping being that sets the ground for others.
Yeah, he's like the angel or the messiah of.
Yeah, yeah. He's not one of the gods necessarily, or if he is, he's a much lesser god. But
He's a minor deity, isn't
yeah,
he? Like a demiurge of some description.
but as with Lovecraft, like even encountering like the flotsam of this weird alien world is enough to send people.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, to alter
yeah,
reality around him. It's enough to undo civilizations, and that's the fun of Nyarlathotep, isn't it? It is a mythological piece, isn't it? It's
yeah.
setting up a very particular mythology, and I kind of love
I
that.
think that's why it's a prose poem as well. Like he wants to get that sense of the mythic. I mean, if the
Yeah,
early Lovecraft stories are very fairy tale-esque, this is much more rooted in things like the Epic of Gilgamesh,
yeah,
the more mythological aspects of the Epic of Gilgamesh and Greek no, Greek myths and things
definitely,
like that. Viking myths, maybe
definitely.
even. Um, there's that sense of primordiality, I guess, is like the
Hmm.
overwhelming feeling of that story. Um, I mean,
Yeah, it's
there's
something that's erupting from not only from underground but from the past,
yeah.
from some timeless time, whose effects and very presence are antithetical to what we call reality.
Mm. And I mean, of course, there's also probably weighing quite heavily, like on him, like the Arabian Night stuff. I mean, I don't think
Of
it's
course.
any accident that he locates. I mean, Nyarlathotep is clearly like a kind of Egyptian stereotype in many ways,
Hmm.
and there is a terribly racist line, of course, in this story where
Oh, there is,
yeah,
yes.
I think it's like I saw hooded forms amidst the ruins and yellow evil faces peering from behind fallen
Hmm.
monuments, which is like a kind of, I guess, great replacement theory of its time because he's
Oh,
created
yeah.
future projecting and stuff. It's pretty ugly, but again, that
Hmm.
also expresses like because the alien and the Furren, I think, are the same for Lovecraft. This weird like ambivalence Lovecraft has because he's clearly entranced by all of this quote unquote Arabic. I mean, of course, a lot of it is through European lens, but
Yeah, it's very sort of cod Arabic, isn't it? It's
yeah,
it's it's sort of like a, it's very I don't think he ever gets quite as bad as Lewis does. Funnily enough, like in The Horse and His Boy, I don't think he ever quite gets to that point, but it is that same
mm,
synthesis, isn't it? That very Eurocentric synthesis
yeah,
of all of those expansive histories and traditions and cultures and peoples into one very tiny archetype.
yeah. It's reduced and packed down. I mean, I think the reason why Lovecraft probably doesn't get as overtly bad is because he's not that wedded to any grander projects
No,
as Lewis is. I mean, Lewis
that's it. He
has.
doesn't really have the same agenda in his work that Lewis has.
Yeah, I mean that's rooted in Lovecraft's own personal philosophy, which just sees having politics as a kind of vapid pretense, really
Right,
against.
he sees it as impotent,
Yeah,
doesn't he? I mean, as awful as Lovecraft was in terms of his cultural and political perspectives, he wasn't activist in any particular way because he didn't see the point.
yeah, he didn't. I mean, he was like that kind of right-wing pessimism taken to its absolute conclusion,
Yeah,
where it essentially just becomes kind of quietist. He doesn't
it
really
becomes
have
kind of
anything to say.
impotent,
Yeah,
doesn't it? You
yeah,
know, it's just sort of like, well, that you're opposing something that is, in Lovecraft's terms, you are opposing the inevitable.
yeah. I think that's exactly it. Like Lovecraft just doesn't see the point. Like, I mean, I'm sure he believed in various racist myths about different
Mm.
groups, but he just didn't see the point in constructing a project around opposing that
No,
because that was just the law of the universe as far as he was
yeah.
concerned.
He would have regarded it as a kind of entropy, wouldn't he? He would have certainly regarded it as a kind of entropy in a very physical
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. I mean, this is kind of like his misreadings, probably informed by Nietzsche's Sister of Nietzsche, probably fed
Hmm.
into stuff like that, ideas like that.
Hmm.
Not that Nietzsche was entirely blameless for some of those misreadings. I mean, and in that sense, they weren't entirely misreadings, um, but certainly with the kind of Nietzsche that Lovecraft was heavily invested in.
Hmm.
He would have been getting sort of a lot of those ideas. And then just his general, I think, psychological xenophobia,
Yeah.
which is, yeah,
It
um,
seems to be rooted in a strange, in a wider misanthropy, though, doesn't it? Like it manifests as xenophobia. That's definitely true, and in a real, very often lamentable racism.
mm,
But I think it's just his general fear of humanity at all. You know,
yes.
I think he was just generally afraid of everything and everyone.
I mean, I think in a way, like The Outsider is one of the most direct confrontations of that in his entire output. Like,
Hmm.
there he's kind of like confronting that loneliness and isolation and fear head on in
Yeah.
a character that is seeking the other in a kind of way.
I think it's why it's so successful, to be honest, because it is that wonderful kind of horror where the horror isn't the point,
Yeah,
or the horror actually is a gateway into a much deeper rumination, because it's honest, you know, it's honest and it's open. It's very unusual for Lovecraft to be that, to be open in what he does. He's often actually much more obscurantist, you know, he's trying to conceal what he's trying to say or what he's expressing. Here it's completely overt.
And the music of Eric Zahn is a really good example of that um, tendency to obscure.
Oh
Like
yeah.
there's a lot going on there below the surface. I love the stuff about the protagonist being a metaphysician. I think that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Everyone has this idea of Lovecraft's main enemy being this kind of like arrogant, conceited scientist type, but I think those are
Mhm.
very secondary targets for Lovecraft. I think Lovecraft's fear was much more like in humanities departments, was philosophers
Yeah.
and poets. It's always the
Oh
poets
yeah.
who go mad, of course, when any
Mhm.
kind of ancient entity awakens. And I think when Lovecraft talks about new vestas of knowledge, I don't think he means things like, the atom bomb. I think he
Mm.
means things like Kantian philosophy and
Yeah.
noumenal and things like that. Like I think he thinks that like unlocking certain philosophical truths is actively dangerous to human prosperity or
Mhm.
continuance. And he has this interesting relationship with philosophy and art more generally. That I think is like the subtext of the music of Eric Zahn.
Yeah, it's very strange, isn't it? It's very like a lot in Lovecraft, it's very ambiguous.
Mm.
Like he does have this incredible appreciation for philosophy and art, but only within very narrow margins.
Yes. And I think his appreciation is very distrustful. I mean,
Yeah.
there's always like that famous quote at the beginning of the Call of Cthulhu where he talks about realms of knowledge. And I think when you combine that
Mm.
with what he's saying in the music of Eric Zahn, it's quite clear that he has like this real like sense of like the dire possibilities of these thinkers, these sort of arrogant thinkers who believe that they can unlock things about human consciousness
Well, I
and
suppose, I mean,
such.
given the era in which Lovecraft is occurring, he is counterposed to what is a pervasive assumption within all of philosophy and academia, which is nothing is verboten, nothing is forbidden. You know,
Yeah.
all areas of human cogitation and experience are worth talking about. They're worth exploring, which would have been escalating at the time, culture, like just in general culture, let alone in politics and academia. At the time Lovecraft was writing, you know, it would have become, I suppose, he would have seen it as a kind of profligacy in a way.
Mm.
Whereas in Lovecraft, you have this notion that no, actually, there are ideas that are inherently corrupting
Yeah. I mean, he very
somehow.
sincerely believes that, and that there are things that should be forbidden, not
Mm.
because they're untrue, but because they're dangerous truths.
Because they are true but dangerous.
Yeah,
Yeah, somehow they will twist your mind or they will open you up to perverse notions or whatever.
it's a kind of conservatism that is very honest about its conservatism. I think
It is in its own peculiar way. I mean, it's something he even vouchsafed in his personal life. I mean, I can't remember the name of the young gentleman who was a very good friend of Lovecraft, and he spent a lot of time with him, who was openly gay at that time. But the letters that Lovecraft writes to him, where he actually expresses his own perspectives on homosexuality, which are unsurprising.
yes.
You know, they're totally unsurprising, and he it sort of implores his friend to almost like to contain himself, to restrict himself
Mm.
in the name of some strange propriety.
Yeah, it's not
It's
really
really odd, and it's
necessarily.
not it's not ill-meaning. That's the odd thing as well. It's not ill-meaning in its own peculiar way. It's actually in its own strange way. There is affection there. He's trying to protect his friend, you
Mm.
know. It's such an odd grab bag of influences you've got going on here. It's the same dynamic, the same peculiar dynamic where you have him marrying a Jewish woman.
Mm. Mm. There's a real, I mean, there's constant contradictions within Lovecraft, like just incredible contradictions, more than you would necessarily find in just anyone,
Yeah.
which I think everybody is a sort of,
Oh yeah,
yeah, we're all
definitely.
formed out of these
But Lovecraft is surprising
yeah.
because of the certainty of the ideas that he professed,
Mm.
and yet the way he operated, the way he actually lived, is very, very surprising.
There's a contrarianness in Lovecraft. There's a kind of radicalness that's trying to get out almost.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
it
I think I can't help but thinking with different influences, he would have been more Barker than,
potentially, yeah.
you know?
I mean, I think like it's very clear just how much like I would very rarely say of a writer or any kind of producer of cultural artifacts that like you can just trace a linear path from these
Mm,
things to their output. And I
right,
probably
right.
should be careful not even to say that too comprehensively about Lovecraft, but
Hmm.
more than most, it is so clear that there is a very direct connection to the abuse he experienced as a child
Totally.
and the kind of writing he put out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. I mean, you're right. You have to be very, very careful with that sort of thing. But I think it is so over. I think it's so clear that he was using his writing in a very particular way, as almost like a kind of self psychoanalysis, as a kind of autopsy of
Mm.
himself. Whether that was conscious or not, it's clear that that is what he's doing. He's expressing something very internalized, things he probably didn't even have the opportunity to talk about in his waking life because, by the end of his life, he was totally isolated and didn't have many people to talk to.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think that's another
it's
thing as well. Like when it comes to the influences on Lovecraft, there's a lot of literature informing him. And then there's his childhood. There isn't like this big wealth of intimate friendships. He has
no.
some very strong friendships, and that's about
Mhm.
it. And there isn't a huge number of like interesting life experiences.
There really aren't, and even by the end, most of the people he forms very intense relationships with fall away.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's a kind of sense, almost of, yeah, falling away is a good way to tell me because it's almost a sense that they just kind of get wary, or he gets wary, or mutually they get wary. Like, there's no
Hmm.
real, there never seems to be any sort of cataclysmic fallings out with Lovecraft as far as I'm aware.
No,
He just sort
no.
of, people just kind of move on from him.
Yeah, I think what happens is he is static. He's so static
Mm,
and doesn't really change a great deal, unless circumstance forces him to change, which it does. Um, like with his wife, for example. I mean, he basically lived off of her for the longest time. She was a successful businesswoman, I believe. She had what was it? Some sort of shop or service that she inherited and that she worked on. I think she was a milliner or something to that
mm,
effect. And of course supported Lovecraft financially because he did not work himself, nor was he indeed an academic or anything to that
mm.
effect. He didn't really have a great deal of money ever in his life. And I think that stasis is what ultimately drove her away. But they stayed in on good terms. They didn't. There was no cataclysmic like
Yeah,
divorce or anything to that effect.
yeah, they didn't. There never seems to be like. There's never like. He's certainly not a dramatic person. He's certainly not
No,
somebody to have like overblown arguments with people on matters of
no,
principle. And or
or emotion, it seems, for that
yeah,
matter.
yeah. There was very. I mean, there's very little of that, of course, in his stories. The Outsider is
Hmm.
notable for being an exception.
Really is, isn't it? For there
Yeah.
to being like high emotion. I mean, very often his stories are detached even when they are first person, even when they're from the perspective of a character. I
Mm.
mean, you take At the Mountains of Madness, for example, which is epistemological, it's retrospective. The character whose eyes you're looking through describes the most amazing experiences, but in a very detached way.
Very
In a
clinical.
very, it is, isn't it? It's very academic.
Yes. Yeah, I think he liked to imitate that particular style, maybe because it chimed with his own personality, but also I think
Mm.
because it probably partly reflected the kind of people he was in some senses going after, like these kinds of thinkers who arrogantly thought that they could dissect the universe.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
And so there's a kind of like but I think again there's an ambiguity because there is this real sense that he's like also attracted to this viewpoint whilst he's
Definitely.
critiquing it. Uh,
Definitely. I mean, one of the weird ambiguities is, yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that he is going after those particular kinds of thinkers, but at the same time, he's emulating the epistemological style of
hmm,
fiction that he admired, and from a culture he admired, which was, of course, Victorian England.
yes.
And that's kind of what he's emulating. And very often, when you read the epistemological fiction of that era, most of which is epistemological, I mean, that was just the style of the time, wasn't it? It is describing these amazing events, but in a very detached manner. I mean, you look at Dracula, for example, which is entirely epistemological. It's actually just sort of stitched together from bits of newspaper cuttings
Mm.
and journal entries and whatnot. It's in that exact style.
With yeah, I mean, I think that is a huge that whole style of writing is a huge influence. He's really interested in ancestry and all of that as
Mhm.
well. So like the whole thing with the English stuff. I mean, that's interesting because there's another ambivalence there. Like he's interested in like lineage, but lineage is always a curse for him. Like there's always
Right.
like so like the characters always have like a connection to some old English family, but then some ancient sin that that family
Hmm.
committed is often responsible. The rats in the walls is a clear
You're
example.
right.
Yeah,
There's always something, isn't it?
yeah,
There's some. It's either a curse or it's a disease or something to that effect.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's always kind of like there's a sense of it's weird because in a way, like you would think conceptually morality just doesn't fit in the universe Lovecraft describes, but it's always a
Hmm.
moral sin. There's always like
Yeah.
a moral tinge to this terrible thing. But on the other hand, that's always about the very culture and people that he idealizes, the sort of
Hmm.
Anglophile thing that he's got going.
It is really strange, isn't it? You get the impression that he would like to have been born as a Victorian English gentleman,
Oh,
as an
I
aristocrat.
mean, the anachronistic language is definitely all about that. The use of like, I think people who come to Lovecraft naively today can not realize that like the language he uses was contrived in his own time. Like,
Oh
no,
yes, I think people are very surprised when they realise that he was publishing in like the 1920s, 1930s. They are phenomenally
yeah,
surprised because they assume he's from Victoriana.
yeah, exactly. And he is like, he's from a period where no one talked like that at all.
Yeah, no one even
Uh,
wrote like
no,
that around that time, you
no.
know. And it's one of the weird things that actually, ultimately, posthumously, actually works in his favour because it distinguishes him so much.
It has become like a very unique style, like both through parody and imitation. It's kind of a voice that stands out in horror.
Well, you know, don't you?
Yeah,
When someone is parodying Lovecraft, you know
yeah.
that's what they're doing.
Even without the tropes, the sort of
Hmm.
tentacles and such. Yeah, there's a sort of telltale style that
There's a
plays
tendency,
that.
particularly amongst like fantasy and horror writers, particularly who are sort of very postmodern, who are like from the 1970s, 1980s onward, to parody him in a very loving way.
Yeah, yeah, which I like more. Like I'm very rarely in favor of. I think we got into this discussion last time about
Mm.
my ambivalence about the Scream movies and sort of how I
Mm.
feel they're a bit cruel to their target, um, which sometimes sets me against them.
And yet at the same time incredibly affectionate. I
Th-
mean, there is a clear
There's a
love for the slasher film
there's
there.
an incredible intelligence to those movies, which could only come out of like a deep knowledge of what they're
Hmm.
parodying. Um, I do find like I don't always get where the ire comes from with
Mm.
Scream. Like, there's a real sense of ire against some of the films they're parodying, and I'm not quite
Hmm.
sure why, because their subject matter. I mean, it's not certainly flawless,
Hmm.
morally even. There are definitely misogynistic tropes, but then
Oh
that's not
yeah,
really
oh,
what Scream goes after. Scream doesn't really go after misogynistic
no,
tropes. So
it's an odd thing, isn't it? And when you consider that they are created by Wes
yeah,
Craven, who is the guy behind a lot of the films that it's parodying,
yeah,
it's a
exactly.
very strange thing.
There's like I mean, maybe there was just a sense like he was done with it, like he just really
Yeah,
was fed up of.
maybe so,
Um,
maybe so. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of the postmodern Lovecraft stuff, like a really good example is John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness.
mm,
It's a Lovecraftian film, but which is entirely postmodern. So it has elements that Lovecraft would have definitely abhorred, and it also has this underlying knowing irony in
Yeah,
the sense that it is so aware of itself as a Lovecraftian story, and it assumes that its audience knows that too.
yeah, and I think that's. I mean, I think there's no getting around that. Like, if you tried to get around it, it would be awful.
Yeah,
I kind of
yeah.
appreciated that about. I didn't expect to like it, but the Color of Outer Space film, I
I
thoroughly enjoyed.
really liked it.
Yeah,
I was very surprised. I mean that story as well. That of all the stories you attempt to do of Lovecraft, you deliberately go for the one that's almost impossible to realize in visual media.
and you also realize it in a really odd way, like using weird color effects is
Right.
an odd way to render that, and yet
I
somehow it all comes
it
together and works. I mean,
it kind of works. I thoroughly enjoyed it,
uh,
and I liked how dark it got. You know, the
yeah,
places that it went to.
I did not expect that, especially like from some of the opening scenes where the
Right.
water surveyor or whatever meets her doing like a pagan ritual. And it
Right.
at that point it almost has the feeling of like a goosebump setup, which
Right, as though it's going to
obviously
be very almost like a 1990s throwback, you know,
yeah,
like a one of those like TV movie, almost like a Stephen King TV movie thing.
yeah. In which case you fully expect them to get through it at least, which
Yeah,
is definitely yeah. Well, I mean it's Lovecraft,
but
so but
it's
like
not going to happen, is it? It's not going to happen. It's a Lovecraft story. If it's sincerely Lovecraft, then no one's going to come out of it well.
it's incredibly disturbing by the end. I mean the composite creatures, the
Right.
um
The body horror I
yeah,
thought was
yeah.
spectacular. I've got
But
to say, I loved it.
the
I loved
merging
it to
the
bits.
merging of the mother with her young son, that was, and then the responses to it was just
Ooh,
grotesque. That
wow.
yeah. I mean also like I think it does help that it's Nicolas Cage and he just is doing his thing and it's always
Yep.
delightful. And in that
Right.
movie, he has some just amazing Nicolas Cage moments. So the whole thing with they're not just llamas, are they? They're a very special type of llama. I
Right.
can't remember. He goes on about it in the film. And he milks one of them in front of the surveyor. And you're not even sure
Right.
if at this point it's like a side effect of the madness because it's quite early on, or he's
Right.
just really that balmy. But he like offers this milk that he's just freshly milked from a llama to the surveyor, and when he refuses, like Nicolas Cage drinks it himself and remarks on
Right.
how lovely and warm it is, which is just singularly repulsive. But my standout Nicolas Cage moment from that movie, where the son goes into the well at one point to rescue the dog, which is one of the
Mhm.
corniest like deaths in the entire
Right.
um, thing, and it's kind of a bit silly. Although it's not a very well done character, the son's probably one of the worst characters in it.
Mhm.
But I think it's like Benny or Tommy or some kind of like throwaway name like that,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
kind of like average American name. Um,
Mhm.
and um, the surveyor comes into the house, and Nicolas Cage is there, and he's talking to his family, even though his family aren't there. And
Yes.
um, and then like the surveyor asks where everyone is, and so of course they're all here. And then Nicolas Cage pauses, and I'm absolutely certain that he threw this line in unscripted. This has to be ad lib, except for Benny. He lives in the well now. It's just like it burst
Ah.
out laughing. It's just amazing. The whole line, the delivery, everything. And the surveyor looked a little thrown, so I think the actor was genuinely not expecting that line. Um,
Just brilliant.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really good. Um,
It's so weird though, isn't it? I mean, like, you would think. I mean, there are lots of Lovecraftian horror films. There are plenty of them. I mean, John Carpenter's The Thing, you know, Cronenberg's The Fly, technically. Lots of Lovecraftian horror films, but there are very few, and certainly very few successful direct adaptations of Lovecraft stories.
it is really rare, which I think is one of the reasons why that film stands out. Like, it is
Right.
remarkably successful for what it is. Like, for
Yeah.
what it's doing, it's just incredible.
But I'm surprised because it's a rich vein, isn't it? I mean, there's so much you could do. I mean, The Outsider would probably make a fantastic film,
You'd
like an
have,
experimental
yeah,
first-person
I
film.
was
You know,
gonna
something that's very
say
short.
it would have to be. like very odd. Like I would love to a very good filmic rendering of going through that portal.
Mm.
Would be incredible. I saw a claymation a long time ago of the music of Eric Zahn that I liked. And a
Mm.
claymation of the outsider could work incredibly.
That could be beautiful, actually. That could be absolutely stunning.
You could do something really innovative and interesting with that, I think.
And I think like stop motion animation would just capture the ethos of that story so well because I mean stop motion already has a creep factor to it anyway.
There's already a sense of the eerie and just how stop motion moves.
Hmm.
I mean, there's that really old one, which is like something about Huckleberry Finn. I've only seen clips from it, but with death and
With
yeah,
Death and
yeah.
Lucifer and
I
yes,
mean that
very
kind of
and Mark Twain, bizarrely.
yes, that's it. Yeah, it was Mark Twain. Yeah, that's the Huckleberry Finn connection. It was really. As I say, the first time. I don't know if you remember Astronaut from our YouTube days. He was sort of like a postmodern guy. Had sort of earring, some of those lobe earrings,
Oh
and did lots of like.
yes,
And he used clips. The first time I ever saw that was through clips he'd inserted into one of his videos, which were always really strange videos. They were always
right.
like postmodern take. He'd kind of intervene in the Theist Atheist Wars, but from like this kind of postmodern perspective that was completely opposed to the whole setup of the
Yeah,
argument. Like
I remember very well.
he was really into Wittgenstein and Deleuze and things like that.
And just an interesting chap,
Oh, really
just
interesting.
odd and strange, and just coming at stuff from the most obscure angles.
Yeah, and like also just really good at like just ethically putting his foot down on like utter bullshit. Like
Yeah,
a very strange figure to have on YouTube at those times, and probably
yeah,
stranger now. Um, and yeah, he used clips from that, which is like my first encounter with it. But yeah, something like that style for
yeah.
The Outsider would
I
be
think that'd be
absolutely
beautiful.
perfect.
Absolutely beautiful. It would actually have to be the kind of stop motion that's not as smooth as sort of like the bigger budget stuff. I don't think that would work.
Yeah, yeah, it would something lo-fi would be perfect. You want to get that sort of sense of grain and dirt to it.
Definitely. It wouldn't work if it were too clean. In fact, no Lovecraft would.
No, no, I think you need that like sense of it like being slightly cobbled together.
Yeah, there's a patina, isn't there? There's something very particular that you want to capture. Same in video games actually, like Lovecraft video games. The dirtier ones, the ones that are at a little bit like lower budget, work really well for the most part.
Yeah, the triple A gaming look and also the ethos behind those games just doesn't work
Just
for me.
doesn't work.
I mean, mind
It
you,
just doesn't work.
it honestly rarely works for me anyway. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm totally against all triple A games. That's
Hmm.
definitely
No, not
taking
at all. I mean,
extensions.
I've
But
played some great ones
yeah,
recently. I'll be honest. I mean, Resi 8,
yeah,
I loved to bits. I
yeah.
thought it was fantastic.
I've been playing Half-Life Alyx because I got it. I got
Ah.
a VR set and it came with that.
Hmm.
They, I mean, I guess I spent so much on the VR set they decided to be generous and toss in a free game,
Ha.
um, free in inverted commas.
Yes.
And I've been enjoying that thoroughly. I mean, obvious. It's actually quite amazing that Half-Life has become one of the breakout games for VR
Yeah,
since it
what a
was one of the
weird
breakout
concept.
games for games.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Half-Life just continues to
Cinematic
be
games,
kind
full
of
stop.
yeah. But it works really well and it's very absorbing.
Hmm.
But a game like that really actually can do dirt, whereas most AAA stuff really
They're too
struggles to
clean, aren't
yeah
they? There's something too polished
yeah.
about them. I mean, I thought Dark Corners of the Earth did a fairly credible job with the Lovecraft mythology. There are certain sequences in that are absolutely stunning, like the breakout from the hotel in Innsmouth
Mm.
is spectacular. 'Cause it just echoes Shadows over Innsmouth. It's just like the exact sequence as Lovecraft describes it in video game form.
It always pays to have like a really good sense of the source material, even if you're going to subvert it. Like you
Yeah,
need to have that. that grounding in order to take things anywhere.
Mhm.
And that is something actually that the kind of from outer space film got really well. I liked that it
Mhm.
began and ended with quotes from the story.
Yep.
Um, and while it obviously has to markedly sort of veer off course in some
Yeah, of
ways,
course.
in some good ways as well. I kind of like that the surveyor was the hero of the piece. I think that was quite fun. But
Mhm.
um, but yeah, like it is really clearly grounded, and there's that also sense in the film, and I think this is where it really gets it right, that what's going on here is not a hostile takeover or something. It's like two completely antithetical universes have collided, and it is
Right.
chaos.
It's
Um,
not. Yeah. It's not an intention. It's
yeah,
not like it is not like an alien invasion
it's
or anything like that.
it's just bad for these parallel existences to be anywhere near each other.
Yeah, it's almost fungal, isn't it? It's like
Yeah,
on a metaphysical level.
yeah, and you're not even sure if that like encounter is good for the other thing, which of course at the end it all disintegrates. It goes
Right.
into like
Right.
a cloud of dust. Like there's no real sense of like that there's any kind of balance here at all. It's just everything has gone very awry because of this
Hmm.
random happenstance. Um, and there's an attempt by various characters to put a meaning on it,
Right.
especially the sort of pagan girl who tries to spiritualize it, which obviously doesn't work at all.
Yep.
But it's like it's just completely alien, and she ends up getting it across in the end because she actually ends up being the one who most directly encounters it, I guess. I mean, Nicholas Cage actor
Yeah.
possibly, but she sort of becomes possessed by it.
Hmm.
And actually speaks for it if anything ever does in the
Hmm.
film. It's it really holds together. It's a decent
I,
film.
I enjoyed it very, very much. I've got to say, it's I kind of ache for that element, that sort of Lovecraftian stuff in horror films, because very often there's a lack of it these days. I find. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some very good stuff being done in horror at the
Yeah,
moment. There really is, but there is a lack of that
it's not
quality and that element.
what's happening in horror right now is definitely not Lovecraft. It's more
No,
social commentary stuff. It's more like
very
clever
much so.
ways of subverting. I mean, I recently watched Us, I think it is. Yeah, I
Oh
thoroughly
yes,
enjoyed that. Um,
stunner, absolute stunner,
yeah, I mean, like I mean, that has the sense of the eerie and the uncanny and all of
and the
that,
uncanny, definitely.
but it's definitely not Lovecraftian tone or even,
No, I mean, bloody hell, can you imagine?
yeah,
Can, can you imagine Lovecraft encountering that? Oh my god.
yeah. I don't think he'd be at all interesting, to be honest.
Oh, he would not be
Yeah,
happy, would he? He would not be a happy bunny.
no, I don't think he'd. I mean, it would be interesting. Oh, who's the director?
Jordan
Yeah,
Peele,
it
I
would be
believe.
fascinating to see Jordan Peele take Lovecraft on. That would be
Oh my
really
god,
interesting.
I would love that.
Like I'm sure Jordan Peele would do something with that. Like Jordan Peele does something with
Oh,
everything he touches. So
right.
yeah, um,
Can you imagine?
I mean that would just intensely fascinating.
What would he? Oh man, combining combining Jordan Peele's very particular concerns
Yeah,
with oh
with the
my
notion of
god,
the other in Lovecraft and the notion of the
and
other in Jordan Peele's work is
I
obviously at variance. So it would
I
be
mean
fascinating to
yeah,
see him take that on. I mean that
you would have to he would have to perform an inversion, wouldn't
yeah
he?
yeah. Mm. I mean, a story
Wow,
like
I
The Outsider would be an interesting story to do that with.
kind
We
of
should
would, wouldn't
we
it?
should we should like try and get Jordan Peele to direct a claymation version of The Outsider. We need to put it out there. This
Petition,
is
yeah.
something to
Need a petition of some
yes. Yeah.
description, yeah.
I mean, fan
But no, I
communities have
mean,
been petitioning for so many terrible things. I
yeah,
feel like it's time that they
right.
made up made it up to like good taste by petitioning
Yeah,
for this.
Absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely true. No, I love the idea of Jordan Peele directing or writing like a Lovecraft story out. I think that could be just amazing.
I mean, he has
Just
a
because of
sense
like
of
that
the
clash.
he has a sense of the weird that works for that. It's just yeah, as you said, there's a deeper
Oh,
philosophical clash.
he's the master of discomfort, I
Yes,
find.
yeah, that's really true. There's a French director. Well, let me see if I can find the name. I think I mentioned him in a previous video about him like reproducing his film for the American audience after they demanded the remake, and he did it like
Yes.
blow for blow, exactly identical to um, to the original film. Like every character moved through the scene in the same
Yeah.
way. Um,
Every shot was composed the same,
yeah,
wasn't it?
I mean, I think that's just Michael Haneke.
Yeah.
Michael
Yeah.
Haneke is probably the only director I know who does the uncomfortable more than Jordan Peele. I mean, like Michael Haneke, I have to prepare myself for a Michael Haneke film. Like they are um, the Piano Teachers one, but just basically every one of his films. I'm trying to think of like what his worst film is in just terms of like sheer discomfort.
Like sheer cringe, yeah, where it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, I don't know if I can stand this. So you're like, it's a very cool thing to do and a very clever thing to do because that it's so easy to completely alienate an audience with that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think Haneke's attitude to audiences is kind of fuck 'em. So,
Yeah, I kind of appreciate that a lot of the time. I've got to say, I've got a real thing for creators in general, not just directors, but writers who are like, I'm going to do what I fucking want.
yeah, yeah.
I'm going to talk about what I like. It's not going to be compromised in any particular way. I'm going to talk about what I like.
And with Haneke, sometimes it's an active dislike slash war. Funny Games is the
Mhm.
name of the so it's very much an inversion of slashes. It's a um Brechtian slasher. It's a slasher
Okay.
where the sociopath character and only the
Uh
sociopath character is aware that he is in a slasher and talks to the audience and judges them for enjoying the sadistic
huh.
acts that he is perpetrating. Um, and it is not a happy film, to put it like very mildly, and it is
That sounds
deeply
great.
unpleasant, but it is amazing. It is certainly singular.
I mean, there are quite a few directors out there who do that at the moment, who do like the horror of discomfort. I mean, Ari Aster
mm,
does quite a lot of stuff like that. I mean, Midsommar
yeah, yeah.
had that quality about it
I love I love things that delve into awkwardness. Like the Joker did that as well in a very different genre.
beautifully.
Like,
Yeah, beautifully.
and I think we live in an age that's really interested in awkwardness as a concept.
Yeah.
I think in many ways, I guess, like as much as we're in a nostalgic period, and probably for the same reason, we're
Mm.
in an awkward period as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy called Adam Kotsko who writes books on these broad cultural subjects.
Mm.
And he's got one on sociopaths and the sociopath as an archetype, and one on creepiness. But my favorite of his books is the one on awkwardness, where he just talks about how he almost sees it as the kind of inherent limits of the sociopath
Oh, sorry, Road. I've lost you.
Sorry,
It's sort of dipped out a little there.
is that better?
Oh no.
Odd. Uh,
Oh, I
oh,
think you're back.
my better?
You're back.
Good.
You're back.
Sorry, there was a weird pop-up thing that came over my Skype, but I had it minimized at the time because I was looking up stuff for the discussion. But yes. Um, so I was saying, like, I think he's got this idea. I'm not sure where I left off, but he's got this idea of awkwardness as like what happens when these archetypes of the creepy and the sociopath fail,
Hmm.
and it almost goes beyond that. In a way, it's amazing to me that he wrote this before the Joker because the Joker feels like the
Mm.
perfect film for what he's talking about because there you literally got the sociopath and the creep in the character of the Joker becoming this awkward archetype, this archetype of
Yeah.
awkwardness, which is basically what Kotsko says is happening to popular culture more generally. Like all of these kinds of directors, they're kind of responding to this age of emptiness and nostalgia and this
Hmm.
futureless void by like trying to get at this authenticity of the awkward, this kind of like making us uncomfortable as a way of confronting the impasses of our moment. Um, and I really, really find that interesting. I think there could be a lot more of it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And it's so antithetical to what you're finding in sort of like the more prescriptive mainstream cinema. That's what I certainly found when I watched The Joker for the first time. I was amazed.
Mm,
I was amazed that it existed
yeah, it isn't what you expect. Like it's,
at all.
and I
At all.
and I suspect there's going to be a series of really bad imitations of it. I think the
Yeah.
new Batman film will be the first of those. From what I've seen of that and from what I've heard of it,
Hmm.
it looks like they're going to try and do the same thing badly. Um,
I I'll be honest, I don't know how you do a Batman film post Joker.
no, I think it's almost impossible. What I think they're going to do is so from what I've heard from like the grapevine, and it might be completely wrong, is that looks like they're going to be imitating films like Seven, where
Okay.
the like Batman is this kind of guilty investigative character who's pulled into a case by a kind of Machiavellian Riddler who's actually got a warped sense of justice that he's trying to align Batman to. That's the intimations that I've
Okay.
I think it will fail. I think it will fail completely
Hmm.
to do what it's attempting to do. And
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, if it succeeds, great,
oh yeah,
but
I'm certainly not against it succeeding. Like, but I just, yeah, as you say, a Batman story just feels redundant, at
I
least in the
don't know
amount
why
of.
you would do that. Now, after the Joker, I don't know why you would do that. In fact, what I would like to see is not a sequel to the Joker. I think that's impossible, and I think it's very misguided if they attempt to do that. But maybe another in a similar series of films where they take a Batman villain
Mm.
and create a different type of film around them.
You could definitely do that. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting characters there that you could unpack in unusual ways.
Right.
And even characters like Victor Saz and
Mm.
such like this, like more minor villains.
Yeah, there's loads that Mad Hatter could do
Oh,
so much with the Mad
I
Hatter.
mean, deeply disturbing character in the actual comics, and like not
Very much so.
not delved into much for obvious reasons, but with a more
Right.
like Joker style film, you could really,
Oof.
yeah, I mean, it would be
Could be
unpleasant,
very
but
nasty.
but there's definitely stuff to be said about our culture
Yeah.
and how that relates to that archetype. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of material that I mean, I quite liked the Gotham show for all of its zaniness,
I
for all of
loved it.
its like
I'll be
utter
honest.
silliness. It's
It it after the first the first season plays it very po-faced and tries to be very serious and
yeah,
very grown up. And then it just doesn't bother anymore.
yeah.
It just goes completely off the rails and just allows itself to.
It's
And there's
wonderful to
something
see that carnival, like,
right.
and that's really there in Batman in
There's
the
something very
comics.
compelling
Yeah,
about it. Like you wonder where the glass ceiling is, and then you realize there isn't one.
yeah. I mean, I also think that that series is so maintained by the character of the Penguin and the way that he's played as like,
So wonderful.
yeah,
I mean,
just
the dynamic between him and the Riddler and Edward Nygma, that's that demi romance they
yeah,
have going on. I just give me that all day.
yeah. It makes the show. I mean,
I don't really care about anyone else almost. I just want them.
there are moments where it's like flipping to um, Bruce Wayne and Catgirl or whatever's like
Hmm.
stuff, and it's
Right.
totally uninteresting compared
Yeah,
to
compared to what's going on with the villains, it's
yeah,
just not interesting
like
at all.
it's like him feeling sorry for himself for being rich or something, and
Right.
her
Right.
like for some reason going along, even though she has no inherent
Hmm.
reason to. Um,
Hmm.
I also I don't get her sympathy for him at any point in that show. Like her sympathy for him makes no
No.
real sense at all.
No.
Um,
It's like it's the stuff. I mean, even like, characters like Barbara Gordon. I, I, I just love it. I love it to bits.
yeah,
The actress is having a ball,
it doesn't
for
go.
one
It
thing.
never goes where you think it's going to go, which I quite enjoy.
No.
I mean, if I have any criticisms, it's handling of the Joker character, which it never
Yeah.
calls the Joker, is uneven at best. It's
Never quite gets the Joker quite right. Not in the same way it does the Penguin or the Riddler. Or in fact, I mean Fish Mooney.
oh yeah,
Love her. Love her.
the
Every second she is on the screen, she is just dominating.
the dynamics between Fish and the Penguin is just like
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. Like,
Love it,
I mean,
love
there's
it, love it.
the Penguin is so much a more hammy, sillier version. I feel of Steerpike. Like
Yeah.
his whole character arc is Steerpike is the
Yeah.
trajectory. Except he's ridiculous, unlike Steerpike.
Except he's
He's
funny,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
He has the sort of. In fact, I mean, there are moments when I just laughed out loud at some of
Yeah.
his lines. They're
Oh,
just so well framed.
Pax Penguina is one of my favorites, where he takes over a huge section of Gotham. Is just like, and of course, all his staff just run away because he treats them
Brilliant.
so badly.
So funny.
It's
There's
really good.
also there's that moment. I love the way. I mean, there is a tendency for it to get slightly navel gazing, but I kind of love that too, where the characters are exploring their own motivations for doing things. And you get a lot of that between the Riddler and the Penguin. There's a point where the Riddler, Edward Nigma, calls the Penguin he calls him a spoiled child,
Yeah.
who throws a temper tantrum whenever he can't get his own way. And the Penguin responds by he is actually going to kill him, and he says something like, "Prepare for a massive tantrum," and I just cracked up. I just cracked up. The actor like physically shakes like he's having a child like
Yeah.
temper tantrum.
Their betrayals and counter betrayals are so
It's
brilliantly operatic. Like,
yeah.
especially where the scene at the end of one of the series where the Penguin freezes the Riddler, and it's just like it's brilliantly farcical.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
I didn't like how it left them, those two characters. It kind of made them pathetic at the very end in a way that
Hmm.
just felt unnecessary. The whole
Yeah.
ending was strange, and I think those series tend to have a problem with knowing how to
I
finish. Like
it's
it,
generally, I think, what happens is they hit that point where they're not going to continue anymore, and they don't really have any idea with what they want to do.
yeah, yeah, I think that's mostly it. That show would have generally been better if Batman hadn't been in it.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. I think they felt obliged to have Batman in it because it's Gotham.
Yes. Yeah.
But they struggled to do anything with him.
Because there's oh pardon, there's nothing you can do with like a kid in that
No,
environment.
not really.
Um, and they kind of wanted to protect him at least from most of it until he got a little older
Yeah.
from like some of the
Hmm.
harsher elements of the story. So like in the second season especially, they just had to keep him out of everything
Yeah.
because like you just couldn't put a kid in those environments and it not be deeply disturbing.
Right. It was just that's the point where it was getting absolutely bonkers.
Yes, yeah. I mean, some of the stuff in that show. Doctor Strange, is it? Or Victor Strange? I mean, like,
Oh,
amazing character, just like so incredibly slimy and
yeah,
convincing as one of the best
yeah.
renditions of that character I've ever seen.
Definitely,
Um,
definitely. Loved him.
yeah.
Loved him to bits. The way the actor plays him.
Yes, yeah.
So slimy.
If I had any
I love
criticism, sorry, go on.
like the notion of the Alice Tetch virus as well. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, yeah.
the virus that brings out the darkest side of you. I kind of love it.
It's a wonderfully gothic virus for like this show. It's
Right, and the fact that it comes from this girl who is effectively Alice from Alice in
yeah,
Wonderland, you know? I kind of love it, I've got to say, and it left me wondering. Ooh, I am the kind of person who would want that virus.
It'd be interesting to see how like different people react.
Right, what would it be?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't help but find myself fascinated in any situation like that, where you have the potential to bring out a side of yourself.
Yeah, that whole idea of magically channeling a part of your personality that might be hidden to you. I mean, like,
Mm,
that's like one of the things that I think the Dark Material stories get so well. Like the sense of the
yeah.
demons as like an aspect of the person um,
Mm.
is really wonderful. And
I just like how ambiguous it is as well. I mean, Pullman goes to great pains to point out that many people are at odds with themselves, so they don't actually like the shape of the demon that they settle on.
yes, yeah, that comes through quite a lot. And there's like that sense of like different people's like ambivalence to their demons actually representing
Mm.
the totality of their personality. It's quite clever.
It is. I mean, you see so many clever psychological observations through the way people interact with their demons, like Miss Coulter, for example,
Mm.
when she's violent to her demon.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there it's just about pure repression, right? I mean, she's
Right.
a character born of and inflicting repression. And so that's her in aggregate. Like that's how she,
Right.
yeah.
It's almost masochistic, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
It's self-flagellating.
Yeah. And it allows Pullman to talk about his notion of human flourishing, which is incredibly important to his wider literary philosophy in a very
Hmm.
direct way. It works. It's a very effective device, and it's not used
It's
often enough. Like devices that allow you to explore um, the psyche that way. There was an anime for a long while that I loved. It ended really badly, and it had this. It was one of those strange examples of like a highly episodic anime that I hated the broader meta plot of because it just
right.
distracted from this episodic idea that was great. And there's this hell kind of in between dimension where
Hmm.
people go after they die. Um, and allegedly, although probably not actually, they're randomly put together. Two people who die at the same time are randomly put together. It's clearly not that.
Right.
And they have to play a game, and they're told that the game will determine their afterlife. Uh,
Right.
but the sort of like trick to it is that it's not actually dependent on you winning. Everybody obviously immediately thinks, oh, well, if I win the game, I'll get a better afterlife.
Hmm.
It's dependent on how they go about playing the game under those circumstances.
Okay.
And it's really that's a I just find that concept brilliant, and they pull it off brilliantly with different characters responding in completely different ways. Where some people
Hmm.
go out of their way to help their opponents, some people will ruthlessly try and defeat their enemy.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it turns out that like there isn't actually really a heaven in this. If you do badly, your soul is destroyed, and if you do well,
Right.
your soul is returned to Earth, and you get another shot. Um,
Right. Okay.
and
So it's like it's oblivion rather than hell.
yeah, basically. And it was just a really interesting way of bringing out random personalities and backgrounds and histories of these characters. As I said, there's a wider plot which is all about this conflict over what's going on, which is totally uninteresting compared to the
Hmm.
conceit. But while it was episodic, I really enjoyed that. I would love more stories like that, which are about like, bringing out characters through some kind of narrative conceit, be it
Hmm.
demons or some kind of like madness virus or something
Yeah.
else. I mean, like even the concept of like demons in Warhammer 40,000 and the way that they reflect not just the personalities of the gods, but the personalities of the people who become demonic. Like I think
Right,
it's kind
right. That's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I mean, that's something that comes out in the metaphysics of 40K so much, like belief and the way you operate as an individual has an actual physical effect on the universe around you.
yeah, yeah. There's that like sense of, I mean. belief is something inherently materially dangerous. Like
Hmm.
it's a kind of reification, I guess to use a technical word, of the metaphor of the danger of belief. Like
Right.
it takes that to sort of like the highest level. And I like
I
how
mean, to
that
the point whereby there are whole races that are built around it. I
yeah,
mean, to a comedic degree. I mean, the Orcs. There is a short story I read not too long ago of an Imperial Astra Militaria regiment who run out of ammo,
mm,
and one of the Astra Militaria knows about the psychic inclinations of the Orcs, so he just starts pointing his finger and making bang bang noises,
mm.
and it works.
That's amazing. Apparently, there's a group of hunters who specifically target the orcs, and over time they become more orc-like themselves. The
Right.
orcs have like this incredible reverence for them because they see them doing orky things, which is
Yes.
and
I
they
just.
I think there's a story somewhere which suggests they start manifesting sort of warg energy, basically.
Hmm.
Which is just like I love that. That is
It's
brilliant.
so funny.
Um,
I just love it to
yeah.
bits. And, they've taken that to the nth degree with the latest incarnation of the Orcs.
Mm,
So there is a superstition amongst the Orcs that blue is lucky.
yes.
Blue is a lucky color, and there's an entire clan who paint themselves blue, the Death Skulls, and it works.
Yeah.
If you give your Orcs a blue paint scheme, they are lucky.
And
They,
they have the same for red and speed, don't they? And
that's right.
yeah.
Red ones go faster, yeah. Red
Uh,
ones go
I
faster,
mean,
yeah.
like the Imperium sometimes like take apart their weapons and are just like, this isn't a gun. Like
Right, it shouldn't
this is
work.
just
Right, it
bits of
shouldn't
metal
work.
clanged together.
Hmm.
Is
But
yeah,
because the Orcs believe
yeah.
it will work.
Which is just yeah. I mean, like that's the sort of like yeah, the parody version of it. But also, like, I like how that plays into secularism in Warhammer as well, because of
Mm.
course there are like various atheistic projects. So as well as like the emperors,
Right, the Great Crusade.
there's the Tau,
Hmm.
and there's also Fabius Bile. Um,
Of course, Fabius Bile and
and
his eugenicism, yeah.
and all of these atheistic projects are a demonstrably untrue, and b operate on the basis that they're demonstrably untrue. Like the emperor knows there are gods, and that's why he
Right.
doesn't want people to believe in them because that
Hmm.
empowers these evil cosmic gods, and the same is true for all of the others. Like
Right.
it's this like fantastic because at the same time as the emperor is this rationalist, secularizing, progressive force, at least initially,
Hmm.
he is so because he's telling a lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like an amazing inversion. Uh,
It's quite clever, isn't it? I mean, in the case of Fabius Bile, he's completely internalized that. So there are instances in the Fabius Bile novels where he's confronted by demons,
yeah,
and he actively tries to convince himself they're not there
yeah,
to weaken them.
which is actually a good strategy
It
against
actually
demons.
works.
Yeah,
It actually works because, yeah, that's how they are creatures of metaphor. They're creatures of abstraction. So you diminish them by denying them.
and I'm convinced that the Eternals in the tower are operating on exactly the same principle. Like they clearly know
Hmm.
chaos exists. Like
Oh yeah.
there's
Oh,
just
they do. Yeah, they're aware.
yeah,
They're just keeping it away from the rest of the tower.
yeah, and you've got to also wonder if their own eugenics project is basically breeding out psychic potential in the Tau. Like the
Hmm.
Tau have like so little psychic potential for a sentient species, it's confuses the Eldari quite a lot. Like the Eldari are like,
Hmm.
how can you be this intelligent and have no psychic
And
presence?
have, yeah, right, because they are so innately
Yeah,
psychic
yeah,
and abstracted.
yeah. And like the Tau are intelligent and abstract thinking creatures, so by all, but it's like the specific eugenics projects that somehow like coupled those two together, created an intelligent
Mm.
race that
It
is
somehow severed them
yeah,
from the warp in the same way that the Necrons have also managed to sever themselves from the warp almost completely.
yes, yeah. I mean, they're the arguably, besides the Tyranids, the single biggest threat to the
Yeah.
warp. Yeah.
Quite right. Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I mean, certainly in terms of the chaos element of the warp, the orcs as well. I mean,
Yes.
the orcs interact with the warp in a very strange way.
Although I do get the sense that like those orc gods must be an aspect of Khorne, right? Like,
I imagine they probably are Mork and Gork.
yeah, I mean, like, they definitely act a lot like Khorne. Um,
Well, there's a story in, I don't know whether it's in Age of Sigmar or whether it's in Warhammer 40,000, but there is an entire species of orcs that Khorne plucked up from the material reality and just dropped into his realm in the warp because he loves them.
I mean, he would love them. Like,
Right.
why wouldn't he love orcs?
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
absolutely loves them, and they actually spend their like an eternity warring against the demons of Khorne, getting slaughtered. Then their spores sort
hmm.
of fruit again in the hinterlands of Khorne's realm, and then they sweep down again and have another war, and then it happens all over
What's
again.
amazing about that is with orc physiognomy, that would make the orcs increasingly more powerful over time. Like
Right.
if they existed in a realm of senseless and very like high tier violence
Hmm.
constantly. Like orcs on more passive worlds get weak.
Right.
So an orc on a core night world is like something
it, it
nightmarish.
it would be like a super orc,
Yeah,
wouldn't it? It
yeah.
would be some kind of
I
monstrous,
remember
abominable orc.
I remember reading once that like I think it was in the reading one of the really old books that like chaos worshipping orcs, their skin goes red. And I mean obviously this is just an excuse to paint orcs red,
Yeah, you're
but
right. Cornet orcs,
I
why
quite
not?
like that kind of like weird notion of
I kind of like that idea. I mean, why not? Go for it.
yeah.
You can do chaos orcs. I mean,
Oh,
there's no
definitely.
reason why
Like
you shouldn't. There's
uh,
no reason why you shouldn't.
what I really want to do is incorporate some Necrons into my Poxwalkers because technically it is possible to Poxwalk Necron infantry units. So there must
Yeah.
be something that it is for you to be like a zombie Necron, and I think you could do
Well, I
that.
imagine it would be totally abstract, wouldn't it? So you'd have like it would be like the soul of the Necron because they do have souls. You
Mm,
know, that's their essence. Their essence was biotransferred into those machines that would be corrupted. Or you could have like some sort of hideous worm or parasite worming its way through the exostructure
mm, I like the idea of
of the
like
Necron.
combining like Nurgle rot with the androids. I think that could be
Ooh.
quite fun. Um,
Yeah, it's very cool, isn't it? I mean, there's an entire like Death Guard Victoria in the Death Guard Codex that has a disease that affects machines and armor specifically,
Mm, I mean, that's the
which is
whole
kind
thing
of
with the
cool.
Death Guard. They like go for like context specific rot. Is there?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's their whole thing, isn't
Yeah.
it? You know, it's a fabulous codex
Mm.
that is, by the way, the new ninth ed
I really still
Death
need to
Guard
buy it.
Codex.
Actually, I haven't got it yet. I loved the last one. I
It's
just
gorgeous,
reading it.
honestly.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
they've gone full tilt in this one. They've gone full tilt. It is absolutely stunning.
This.
I mean, same with the Thousand Suns Codex. Honestly, that has got me fired up.
I'm
That has.
I'm really glad they're giving more attention to the Chaos factions and apparently now to the Orcs, which has been a very long time coming.
I
Like with the
got I got the Orc Codex, and I'm telling you, it's spectacular.
mm, it,
I'm not an Orc player. I'm not an Orc player, but I do like them. I find them amusing. You know.
they were one of my
So it.
sorry, go on.
No, no, go on.
They
Go
were
ahead.
one of my first armies back when I first
Right.
started playing as a kid. Like I didn't really go for them specifically; they were just on sale. Um,
Right. Right.
but I've always kind of had an affection for them. Like I got Gazkul at the time, and
But have you seen him now?
oh, he is just yes,
He's
stunned. Yeah,
huge.
I mean he has to
He's
because
huge.
you have to match him against people like
Magnus
yeah,
and Mortarion and
yeah.
Roboot, obviously. And I tell you what, in the new Codex, he's essentially a battering ram. He's a war engine. He's so powerful.
He
It's unbelievable.
for the time, I mean, everything is kind of up to gear since then. But for the
Hmm.
time, the old Gazpol was one of the more heavy hitting character models. Like, I
Oh,
mean,
he
the
was,
joke
yeah.
of like him and I think it was Commander Yorick, and they had like
That's it, Commissar
yeah.
Yarrick. That's
I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
if you match Kamasai Yarrick against Gazcol in a one-to-one fight, it wasn't going to last very long. Like the Commissar
No.
was going to die pretty quickly.
Hmm.
I mean, most of Yarrick's abilities back then, and probably still now, were buffs to units
That
around him anyway.
that's right. He's inspiring, isn't
Yeah,
he? He's an inspiring
yeah.
presence, whereas Garthkull is just a
I mean,
monster.
Yarrick does have a power claw, which for an Imperial Guard unit is pretty impressive.
Pretty, yeah.
Like, I mean, I would certainly he could certainly take on any of like the normal Orc boys, or
Hmm.
rip his way all the way through an infantry unit of Tau any day.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, easily.
but
But
Gazcal's a different game entirely. Like,
yeah,
you may as well like set him up against Abaddon the Despoiler or something. Like,
right, right.
yeah, um,
But no, he's a beast. He's an absolute. In fact, I mean that codex is spectacular.
mm.
The new one, it really is. As I said, I'm not an orc player, but my god, is it good?
They're so fun. Like, I think like
Yeah,
really leaning into that, and I've been looking at the new Squig models and some of the Zania stuff. Like,
yeah.
I'm really glad that they're like. I think one of the reasons why the Orcs took so long to get new models and to really get this attention is that the old models were pretty good. Like, they were amongst
Hmm.
the best of that time. Uh,
Yeah,
they're one of the few models of that age that have like withstood the test of
aged all
time.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, kind of similar. One of my very first armies for 40k. In fact, my first army for 40k, full stop, was the Eldar as they were back then, the Craft World Eldar, and their range needs to be updated.
yes. Yeah.
Oh my god.
I think the problem with the Eldari is very few people collect them.
Yeah.
Like
Which is such a shame. I love the Eldar. I've got such a soft spot for them.
there was a while while I was thinking of creating an army of the Harlequins because I just love the concept of the Harlequins.
They
Uh,
are beautiful, aren't they?
the problem with them is like making an army of the range you've got is just you just
It's
end
tricky.
up like yeah, it's
It's
really
tricky.
hard. Like
And they're difficult to paint. I mean, I think that may be alienating about the Eldari as well. I mean, it's not like, say, the Orcs, the Death Guard. You can sort of, you can paint them quite functionally, or
yeah,
use like dirty paint styles, and they look great. You know, they look absolutely wonderful. The Eldari, you need a steady
oh
hand. You
they're
need to be
fiddly.
able to paint
Yeah,
really well.
yeah, they're incredibly fiddly. I probably even like consider doing like a couple of rounds at Games Workshop just to like hone my skills with
Yeah.
like it is they are incredibly tricky
I
models.
mean, beautiful. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of them are absolutely beautiful. But I was watching a video by I think he's a guy called Striking Scorpion on YouTube, and he was doing a retrospective on the third edition Warhammer 40,000 rulebook from 1999.
Mm.
And on the inside front cover, there are photographs of different battle setups with different armies, and there was one between the Chaos Space Marines and the Orcs. And he says, well, all of those miniatures are out of production now; they've all been replaced. There's one between the Astra Militaria and another races; all of them are out of production now.
Mm.
There's one between the Eldar as they were back then, and the Dark Eldar, and he says all of those miniatures are still being used now.
That is a bit ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah,
They are
they need. Wow.
it I very rarely see people who collect them. I mean, Dark Age Eldar are slightly more popular.
Definitely. The Drukari, especially
Yeah.
now. I mean, because the Drukhari Codex is the killer codex.
Yeah, yeah, it's the competitor
It's
one. Yeah.
it's doing the rounds, I'm telling you. It's always at the top
Mm, mm.
of any tournament list. It's right and it is a brilliant codex. I mean, it's one of my favorites from Ninth Ed thus far because it's so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're essentially oh, what is it called?
They're Cenobites.
Yes, that's the word.
They're
That's the
Cenobites
exact
in
word. They're
space.
Cenobites in space. Space
That's what
Cenobites
they
is a
are.
great
Yeah.
concept.
And I love them. I mean, if I were going to do them, it would definitely be a Homunculi
Mm.
Coven because I love them, and you can do what you like with them.
Yeah, yeah, that's the wonderful thing about the homunculi. They're completely freeing. Like there's
Yeah, just get, or you don't even need to buy stuff from the Drukhari miniatures range. Just get loads of random box sets
and put them
and
together. Yeah.
stitch them together in the most hideous, obscene ways imaginable. I mean, another thing I love about the Drakari is they're one of the very few races in 40k that really have fun.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like I think I'm trying to think actually. The orcs definitely enjoy
The orcs
themselves.
have an
Um,
absolute ball. The orcs love it.
yeah.
The Emperor's Children, the Slanesh Chaos
Yeah.
Space
Yeah.
Marines, they have fun. They enjoy themselves. But even with them, there is this incredible sense of ennui, this incredible desperation about them,
Mm.
where they are constantly burning themselves
I
out
think
because they're looking for the next great thrill, the next high.
there's always that
Um,
tension in chaos, isn't there? Like even like so Nurgle is a kind of jovial figure, but he's also a
mhm.
god of depression and
And
despair.
despair, right?
Yeah, I mean like and you will find it hard to find a more obviously despairing model than
Hmm.
Mortarion. Mortarion looks like the very embodiment of pathos.
Yeah,
Um,
he's like weighted down. Despite
yeah.
the fact that he's flying, he's kind of weighted down, isn't he? And yeah.
His flying is almost just like a way of emphasizing that because he
Hmm.
looks like he is barely able to, and he's got this like moth style
Yeah.
wings that look tattered and old, and then he's got all these anchors, like
Yeah, the
like the
chains and sensors
yeah,
and
like the
things.
act of flying looks like it will be painful for him. Like
Hmm.
it's not,
Well, that's how they've characterized
yeah,
him as well in the in the fiction. He's the demonic version of Motarion is brilliantly conceived because he's lost to himself.
yeah.
He's constantly flitting in and out of different psychological states because at one point he's fevered and energized, and then the next he's not even in. He doesn't even seem to be in the same reality. He's like perceiving other things and other places.
He,
He is this totally manic creature.
I think I read in the previous codex, I don't know if it's retained in this one, that he has like a personal, so they're versions of apothecaries who, of course,
That's right.
give diseases rather
That's
than,
right.
and he
Yeah.
has a personal one. And this guy's main task isn't even to give him diseases, because, of course, that's redundant
No,
at this
it's
point.
redundant.
Um,
Yeah.
he's kind of like his personal psychotherapist,
Yeah.
whose job is
That's
to
right.
make him more unhinged, is to
Yeah.
like
That's right.
further his like neuroses and
Yeah.
psychosis. I mean, that's
Nauseous
just
Rotbone is his name.
yeah.
Nauseous Rotbone, and that's exactly it. He is Mortarion's personal plague surgeon. He's the only one who's allowed to hang around Mortarion's throne. He's like the Grand Vizier. He's like the Grand Vizier, and he's like a cynical doctor.
Mm.
So he listens to Mortarion's ravings, and sometimes he scribbles them down, as like prophecies for the Death Guard. But he's like the way he treats Mortarion is as a slightly demented patient. So he's like, "Oh yes, yes, master, indeed," but in a very cynical way.
It's excellent. I love
It's
it.
great
It's
fun.
so good.
I just to have a character like that in the Death Guard, I just love it.
I mean, you could just build an entire army around him, like a kind of
Yeah,
like a kind of like demented Freudian style army of Death Guards. A
it's
Death Guard
brilliant.
army that's themed around mental afflictions, around
Oh
like
my
diseases
god,
of
that
the
would be
mind.
fun. Well,
Um,
that is an aspect of
yeah,
Nurgle's dimension, so yeah, why
I mean
not?
it works, and you could definitely find ways to do that, like that is all about mania and depression and
Well,
psychosis.
funnily enough, I mean there is a novel from the Black Library, and it was released to coincide with the last Death Guard
Mm,
Codex by Chris Wright called The Lords of Silence, and the Lords of Silence are a particular warband of the Death Guard,
mm,
and there is a segment in it that deals with exactly that. The Lords of Silence go back to the Plague Planet to sort of refuel themselves and to renew themselves, and the main character wanders around areas of the plague planet and visits certain death guard, and he observes he's one of the younger death guard. He's
mm,
been cultivated post heresy, and he observes how the older death guard, the ones from the heresy, have just lost themselves. They are consumed by these bizarre obsessions that mean nothing,
mm.
or lost in these fevered worm-eaten manias.
they have this like obsession with counting, don't they?
Yeah,
The Death Guard. There's a kind of like they've got like act kind of like accountants, except they're accountants who count meaningless things. Like
that's right, the tallyman.
yeah, they'll just start tallying like how many bullets a random soldier has
That's
in
it.
his gun. Um,
Yeah, but it actually works because it has that talismanic quality. They will
yes.
deliberately try to, whatever they count, they try to multiply or divide by vectors of seven,
Mm.
always.
Yeah, because that's
Always, because
the sacred
seven,
number for
right, the
yeah.
sacred number of Nurgle. And it works.
Mm. Which,
They're
which
basically they're the chaplains
which
of the Death Guard.
which takes us back to the whole edifice of like the 40,000 universe of that kind of like
Mhm.
belief shapes reality. Um,
Well, chaos is
yeah.
the ultimate expression of that, isn't it?
Mm.
It's the ultimate expression because they are actually gods
Yeah.
coalesced from that very principle.
And it's an idea that I think like that take us completely full circle. Like I think that's there in Lovecraft. Like I think that's
Mm.
something that obviously Lovecraft is taking that from reading various mystics and alchemical
Hmm.
writings. I mean, I think there's a lot of like alchemical stuff in the subtext of
Oh,
Lovecraft. Uh,
Lovecraft, I mean, he is learned,
oh, he's
isn't he? He's learned in occultism and alchemy and whatnot.
incredibly well read. Like I think he was reading several dead languages as a young child.
Hmm.
His mother was certainly not a good parent, but she did kind of do that like horrible like monkey training thing of like
Hmm.
hothousing him, I guess.
Right.
Which there tends to be with people who are hothoused, this tendency, I think, at least you notice it biographically with like quote unquote great figures of
Hmm.
having really fraught mental lives later. I mean, John
Yes.
Stuart Mill is another example. Like he had a huge midlife crisis after
Hmm.
his father operating with Jeremy Bentham sort of like hothoused him to be like the great
Hmm.
figure of utilitarianism or something. Um,
Hmm.
ended up, I think, repudiating a lot of his father's ideas, which is quite fun and good. But but um, but yeah, I mean, Lovecraft was definitely incredibly well versed.
Hmm.
And
Well, you can tell. I mean, if you know anything about occultism, the
yeah,
history of occultism, occult figures, he knows whereof he speaks.
yeah, it's not like you come across. I mean, you come across it often in games where like there's this kind of very tangential understanding, and what you get is
Yeah.
like all of the signs of it without any of the
Hmm.
meaning. So like
Yeah.
you'll get references to various alchemical concepts
Hmm.
or productions, but nothing of like its deeper symbolic weight and
No.
resonance. And that's how you kind of know Lovecraft knows what he's doing because like the resonances are there, like this idea of reshaping the world through a kind of
Mm.
perverse sense of agency. He's kind of
Yeah.
taken alchemical ideas and sort of put them through this incredibly weird, cosmic, alienating philosophy.
He's turned them into an alternative science, hasn't he?
Yeah,
Ultimately, which is mingled with occultism.
yeah,
So you often there's often reference in Lovecraft's works to rituals involving like sacred salts and certain unspoken elements that are brought together and they're mingled with ritual
yeah. It's always
to produce an effect.
there's always this material aspect to rituals in Lovecraft. There's a lot of stuff about sort of stand-ins, proxies for things. I mean, there's
Hmm.
so many like small statues to the various gods that are
Of
encountered. Like that
course,
comes up.
yeah.
I mean, um, Nyarlathotep
Yeah.
is like a frequently invoked that way. Like I think actually in The Haunter in the Dark, that's the only way Nyarlathotep appears. Like
Yeah.
that's his appearance there. Um, and Nyarlathotep barely appears in Nyarlathotep. Like it's very
Right,
secondhand.
yeah, he's
Like
referred to,
yeah,
isn't he? But he doesn't physically appear as
yeah,
such.
which is typical of Lovecraft monsters. I mean, like a direct encounter of them is of course impossible to describe because they
Of
are
course,
impossible
because
to describe.
if you directly encounter them, you're not going to be in any position
Yeah,
to try and
yeah.
describe them.
If Lovecraft could describe them, then he could describe something that would send you mad by reading
Yes.
the
Yeah.
information. Um, But yeah, it's
Although Nyarlathotep is slightly different in that regard because he is an agent, isn't he? And he does operate amongst humanity.
yeah,
It just seems that when he's operating amongst humanity and when he's directly manipulating them, he does take forms that are a little bit more palatable.
yes. I
A
think.
little bit.
I mean, I probably will disagree with Joshi in thinking that like Nyarlathotep, there is like there's a moment I think where it says Nyarlathotep in his human form, which definitely
Mm,
has like a shape-shifting connotation.
mm,
Um, and yeah, like I think there is that. I mean, I on the other hand, like certainly in the prose poem itself, like where he goes is almost instantly met by ruination. Like
yeah.
it's not there's no like long-term game plan here. It's just really bad news to encounter this guy at all.
It's
Uh,
what happens when he's around, isn't it? It's not even. It doesn't even seem to be an active thing on his part. Things just happen when
yeah,
he's around because of his influence.
it's almost there is this kind of sense of him as a trickster though, like he's kind of a showman,
Hmm.
like and he's giving out. I mean, I guess this is the Nikola Tesla thing and how Tesla was perceived at the time as this kind
Yeah.
of weird guy who was doing playful things with electricity, which very few people.
Yeah, who was very theatrical
Yeah,
and yeah.
I mean,
There's definitely that element to him. I mean, he is. That's the impression I certainly got from my reading of the story this time. That he's almost like a. Certainly initially, he appears almost like a stage magician.
yes, yeah, I think that's exactly what Lovecraft is going for there. And the, I mean, that serves Lovecraft's purposes as well because creating the sense of this character as both sinister and as deeply beguiling. Like it's
Mm.
yeah, it's the underlying logic of the piece.
Which, of course, I mean, stage magicians, certainly in their classical sense, are exactly that, aren't
Yeah,
they?
yeah,
They're exactly that, familiar and yet sinister.
yes, yeah. It's that kind of um, haunting, eerie kind of like almost like going back to the roots of like clowns and stuff as these
Mm.
quite macabre figures in European culture. Like it's very much channeling that kind of stuff. He's Yeah, and like that sense of like what's awry being intimately connected to why he's so attractive, like why he's so
Mm.
compelling.
Because he does, I mean, certainly the story implies that he has hordes of followers by the end.
Yes, well, basically wherever he goes. I mean, there's a probably slightly racist reference to like Egyptian peasantry immediately falling into
Hmm.
step, which is like
Hmm.
whatever. I mean, that was
Yeah,
a kind of mainstay of all of those sort of like mummy films as well, where the local Egyptians, of course, would immediately be under the control of
of
whatever
course.
woke up.
Hmm.
And yeah, but yeah, I mean, like having said that, the protagonist doesn't exactly like it's kind of a the lady doth protest kind of situation. Like,
Yeah,
look at
absolutely. I mean, the
these.
protagonist is supposed to be, I think, anyway, a sort of learned European character, as you
Yeah,
find in Lovecraft, and yet they fall under the sway of Nyarlathotep as well.
yeah, like 100%. Like there's this like, oh, look at the Egyptian peasantry. I don't even know why they immediately follow this guy, but I'm gonna find this guy and immediately follow him.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
it's I mean like there's no way that that's a conscious thing in Lovecraft
No.
because I think
Oh, he's not
credit
being equitable.
no. I mean like crediting Lovecraft with like parodying European supremacism is probably naive,
A bit a step too far.
but
Yeah,
like it kind of inadvertently does that.
he does it by accident.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which is even more amusing than him doing it on
yeah.
purpose, arguably. Uh,
Well, that's always the way with Lovecraft, isn't it? He is amusing by accident
Yes, I mean,
a
I think
lot.
like even the parts of the outsider that we were mocking earlier, the kind of um ridiculousness of
Mm.
how horrid this creature is described as being, and the people dragging their friends, literally
Hmm.
dragging their friends across the floor away from there. Um, I don't know if I would like if I encountered a zombie. I don't know if I'd like drag somebody across the ground.
Right. It's one of those situations. I mean, reading it this time round. When I got to that point, I don't get me wrong, I thoroughly enjoyed
Hmm.
this reading this time round. I really did. I thought it was wonderful. When I got to that point, I was almost like, just stop, Lovecraft, just stop. And I tell you what, let me know what it is, and I'll decide how to react to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame because it immediately snaps back. Like that thing where like stretched out my fingers and touched the cold and unyielding
Yeah.
surface of polished glass. Like as last words of a Lovecraft story, that's just perfection.
It's really good, isn't it? Especially for a Lovecraft story, because he does have an awful tendency to go off piste at the end, doesn't
Yeah.
he?
I mean, he tends to like cop out with like, and then they just start saying gibberish, which,
Yeah, it's often the most absurd and ludicrous situations as well. It's often the situation where you've literally got someone in an insane asylum cell,
yeah,
and they're
yeah.
writing what they're experiencing, and they're saying things like, "Oh my God, it's at the door." Oh, then they start going off. It's like, why are you writing?
There's there's a wonderful parody of that in have you seen oh Serial Experiments Lane?
Oh yes, yes,
So Serial
yes.
Experiments Lane is very like self-consciously got Lovecraft in the
Yep.
background, like amongst
Mm-hmm.
numerous other things. But in the accompanying illustrated guide to it, it's got all of these sort of like written testimonies of people who have obviously gone too far down the rabbit hole in Serial Experiments
Ah,
Lane. And it does the Lovecraft thing over and over again. But of course it makes sense in that context because they're like writing through internet chats and so on and so forth.
it
So
makes more sense, doesn't
oh,
it?
it's
It does make more sense.
but it's also like there's definitely an element of conscious parody going on as well, which I
Yeah.
quite like. Um,
Yeah.
I mean that's a great book actually. I mean the I like that whole team, the team behind Sea Experiments Lane and
Hmm.
another anime might be my favorite anime of all time called Technolize. Um,
Ah.
Textualize is strange, and it tends to throw a lot of people because the first episode has only one line of dialogue in the entire 20 minutes, and is otherwise
Oh
just this
wow.
quiet, like, exploration of this society that exists in this weird underground space. It's the whole thing is on one level, it's a kind of post-apocalypse facing another apocalypse, and on the other level, it's this weird metaphor about humanity and consciousness, about different um, realms that are in like different tiers. So there's a sort of below surface realm, and then there's this sort of inner core, and then there's this above surface realm. And I think they're playing on notions of Freudian ego in it.
I was going to say, is that a Freudian sort of like fractured mind
There's
concept?
there's so much going on. I've watched it like a few times and I could
Is that potentially like another podcast?
oh yeah, if you want to do I mean getting anyone to talk about Tech Lies is always hard because very few people watch it.
I was going to say
Uh,
I've never seen it, but I will seek it out.
oh,
If it sounds good, it sounds really
I
interesting.
think you'll like it actually. I mean it's it is hard to get into. It's genuinely weird. The
That's
characters
fine by me.
are odd. It's got um, the main antagonist of the beginning part called Yoshi is genuinely one of the strangest antagonists in anime history, in my opinion. I, I would say kind of a weird Jesus figure, which is like
Okay.
yes, you kind of have to yeah. If you watch it, you'll see what I mean. But it's
I am going to seek this out now. It sounds
I mean
fascinating. It
it's like
really does.
I would say it's like the more interesting work of the Serial Experiments Lane people. So I think that kind of gives like a sense of a bar. Like Serial
Hmm.
Experiments Lane is quite high regarded. A lot of people find it too abstract. It is
Hmm.
very philosophical. But yeah, I mean it's also deeply disturbing. It's got one of the like
Again, that's an endorsement
yes.
insofar
I
as I'm
thought that would
concerned.
probably encourage you more to persuade you.
Hmm. Hmm.
It is it goes some pretty dark places and yeah, I mean I love the animation style of it. There's a particular part of it that really who's the guy who does the I should remember his name. He does the pictures of like apples falling out of the sky and then upside down and umbrellas and nights, a night sort of on the surface and then a sort of day on the sky.
Oh, I'm losing you
Oh,
again, Rowan.
sorry. Can you hear me?
Oh,
That, uh,
it's gone very distant again.
that's weird. I think this is the internet more than.
I think it might be. I think it might be. Shall we draw this one to a close?
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say we probably should. I was gonna.
Because it sounds like we've got lots of more subject matter to discuss. I
Yeah,
think I think we should do another episode.
I was gonna bring up Disco Elysium at some point as well.
Absolutely. Oh, that's an episode. That's a series of episodes. That is. I don't even know.
It's an amazing game. I'm gonna replay
I
it.
don't even know.
Like
I don't even know how you'd even begin. It's one of those, you know. I don't even know. Have you seen Jack Graham does an episode on his Patreon where I think it's Christine Kelly is describing to him because he's never played it before,
Mm.
describing to him Final Fantasy VII.
Yes, I've heard about. I need to watch that.
Absolutely brilliant.
Really behind
Absolutely
on
brilliant.
Patreon stuff, which is annoying because I technically
I
paid
want
for it.
he has asked me to do one with him where I described to him Pathologic 2.
Oh, that would be really good. Although you would have your work cut out for you, I'll say that.
What? I can't do that.
I mean,
I don't even know. I mean, I could do Final Fantasy VII. I could do that because there are
there are
touchstones.
pop beats, like
Right. I mean, and there are analogs. Like I
it's
could talk about like anime and previous like JRPGs. I can talk about things like that. Pathologic 2?
the thing with describing pathologic. It's almost like describing something like Inland Empire or something by David Lynch. Like
Right. I
it's
don't
yeah,
know.
or like describing a Salvador Dali painting to someone who's never seen a
Yes.
Salvador Dali painting.
Right.
It, there are long legs, melting clocks, weird
Yeah.
things in the vistas. Like it doesn't
There are
mean anything.
there are giant bulls that are not bulls, which are gods but not gods, which are actually the earth but not.
That's exactly the kind of thing you would have to say to describe pathology too. Like especially like
Right.
the weird metafictional stuff. Like it is
Right.
just
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy you meet on a train who comes out of a coffin who is not a guy, who
yes.
may in fact be death but may not be.
You should offer to describe the Dark Souls games as a substitute because while they are very hard as well, like there are at least narrative arcs.
Yeah, I could see where to begin
Yeah.
with Dark Souls.
Like
I could see where to begin, but with Pathologic 2, I don't know how it even.
there's no linear plot. That's the
No.
central problem. Like there's no narrative sequence of events that exactly follows. It's too impressionistic,
Yeah,
it's too subjective to
absolutely.
narrate.
The only thing you can actually say is you have to play it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's basically it. Like,
That's the only thing to say because nothing else would encapsulate, nothing else would make sense. You could try to reduce it to technicals. Like you could say, well, technically it's a first-person game, but that doesn't do it justice. It's technically,
I
I
guess
suppose, a kind of RPG.
I guess that's the problem you'd have actually, not just describing it, but describing it in a way that doesn't reduce it significantly.
Yeah.
Like I think that's going to be an inherent difficulty of like any of those kind of impressionistic artworks just
hmm
don't render well into summary um,
No,
at all.
no, they do not, and Pathologic definitely does it. The only way to experience it is to play it. It's the or to watch it. I mean, watching it does give you but again, that doesn't give you the full impression because that sense of aching desperation, which is so much part of it,
The
and
panic,
the despair, the
like
panic. Yeah,
yeah, and that's what you'd end up saying. You'd have to like spend like an hour and describe. I'm telling Jack Graham how it is to be like panicked on a video game, which would
yeah,
be
right.
a unique experience. But
I'll give it. I'm going to give it a go. I'll try.
I definitely listen. I'd definitely be interested to see how you like attempt it. It'd be
I
curious. Uh,
I don't know.
Hades would be a good one to describe once you've
Hades
got
would be
further along.
fun.
Um,
Oh, Hades would be fun because you've got. I mean, that's kind of easy to start with because
yeah,
you've got the whole structure of Greek mythology to refer to, and then you've got roguelikes, of
yeah,
course. So you can say, oh, it's like it's as though Hesiod wrote the Binding of Isaac. It's kind of that
that's a good description.
sort of
I
thing,
enjoyed
isn't
that.
it?
Yeah, I mean it's such a
With a little bit of like postmodern anime thrown in for good measure, and like kind of cute characters. Everyone's attractive, you
yes,
know.
they're all adorable. Like that's the
Everyone,
like
everyone is
yeah.
adorable. Yeah, everyone. I mean, I've shown the actual image of Hades to some of my gay friends, and oh my god, they love him.
He's
Not Zagreus as such, although some like Zagreus, but most people like Hades.
Zagreus is like the kind of classic bisexual twink, I guess, if that's a
Definitely,
coherent phrase. Yeah,
definitely,
like
definitely. Yeah, he is. He's the archetype. He is the
yeah.
archetype.
I mean, not to mention in the game, like he is very clearly bisexual as well. So there's that.
Yeah, very
Um,
clearly, yeah.
mind you,
Well, I
I
mean,
suspect.
Aphrodite says to him at
Yeah,
one point, doesn't she? Well, we could go and meet some mortals,
mm,
and I'm sure there are plenty of women and indeed men who would be interested.
yes, yeah. Zagreus is definitely into either or, and
Yeah,
like I think generally most of the characters are depicted fairly bisexually, actually.
seems to be the case.
Like with like a few of the gods being an exception, like as in just not generally interested.
Yeah, I mean,
But
like Zeus and
yeah,
the fatherly archetypes and whatnot,
I
and
like that they make Zeus so incredibly unpleasant. He's the least pleasant character in the game, and that's a
Mhm.
good choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense. I
Yeah,
mean, that actually reflects what he's like in the actual mythologies, to be
because the
honest.
game has so much sympathy. Like probably the closest to Zeus in terms of not being sympathetic is Ares, but the game even has a
Mm.
lot of sympathy with Ares. Like,
Yeah, I think the thing with Ares is that it's his aspects, isn't it? That's just
yeah,
what he's like because he's bellicose, he's the god of war.
yeah, there's no avoiding it. Whereas with Zeus, like, there's definitely bad choices involved.
Mm. Yeah,
Um, quite a
definitely.
lot of them.
Definitely.
My favorite in the game is Chaos. Chaos is just like,
Chaos
yeah,
is really interesting. I was not expecting that.
yeah, Chaos. I mean, like, I, I, I quite like. I mean, I know there's like an ongoing complaint about non-binary characters tending to be depicted as alien,
Mm.
and like as like completely not human in some sense. And there's
Hmm.
like, yeah, like so there's an ongoing sort of cultural complaint about that. But
Understandable.
I do love that depiction of chaos, and also just like
Uh,
having a character in the game with they them pronouns and stuff is quite
Right,
amazing.
I thought it was beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
the depiction is absolutely stunning.
Oh,
It's
the art for
really, really
chaos
beautiful,
is
you know?
I mean, I think Chaos and Chaos's daughter, the knight figure.
Oh, Nyx,
Yeah,
Nyx.
I mean, those
Yeah,
two are amongst the most sort of like incredible pieces of art in the game.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, they're all sort of, but they're all really well rendered. Like,
They're all
such a,
beautiful, aren't they?
yeah,
I mean, they're all well done. I mean, I really like Poseidon as a character at the moment. I like Poseidon. I like that like avuncular thing he's got going on.
yeah, he's like the like, uh,
The uncle.
yeah, he's
He's the cool
exactly,
uncle.
yeah,
He's like he's the understanding uncle. He's
yeah,
the one where if you're having a fight with dad,
he's the
you
hippie
can
uncle. He's like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
totally, totally. That's what they've gone for with him.
Yeah, I mean they've got lots of like this sort of like class. I mean it's definitely like all the queer archetypes, right? Isn't it? Like you've got
Yeah.
like you've got oh the Huntress who's like the classic
Artemis, yeah.
tomboy and so on and so forth. You've got them all. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
encountered all of them yet, at least in the Let's Plays
I
that I've seen. I
I
think
don't
there's
think I have
one,
yet. I think there's a couple that I
yeah,
haven't encountered yet.
there's one at least, but I won't say anything.
Ah,
Hermes is fun. Hermes is a lot.
yeah. Dionysus. Well,
Dionysus, I always seek out Dionysus because I like Dionysus's ability.
Yeah, the drunken ability.
Yeah,
It's great. If you can
slow,
inflict it with your normal hits, it's grand.
slowly whittling down. The Artemis's ability is the most like low key,
Hmm.
but I think people tend to underestimate just how good it is to have
It's
accuracy in that game.
very
Like
utilitarian,
yeah,
isn't it? But it works. It's workmanlike and but effective.
upping accuracy in any way, like increasing your hit chance and your critical chance, is
Hmm.
really subtly brilliant in like
Yeah.
later stages, especially when you're fighting like I think you're up to the Hydra when you're fighting bosses beyond
God,
the
that's
Hydra.
hard.
I mean, there's there's worse to come. I
Right.
regret to tell you. Um,
Right.
I mean, to be fair, you get more powerful. So, like, I'm at a
Yeah.
point where I virtually never die to the Hydra, and I don't think that's
Hmm.
just because of my skill or anything. Like, that's because like
Yeah.
my Zagreus is like ridiculously powerful. Um, but like, still, like the Hydra is especially when you first encounter. I mean,
It's very
you
tough.
beat Meg really quick. Like,
Right. I don't know
surprise.
quite how I managed
Um, you took a very patient, like Dark Souls approach to Meg, which seemed to work. Um,
that. Yeah, baiting her.
yeah,
That's what I did.
yeah, like if you,
I think I was just very lucky in the gods I encountered as well. Like that combination of Poseidon and Aphrodite's boons seems to work really well.
it has that alongside things like the Binding of Isaac, you can just get incredible luck. Like you can just get,
Hmm.
I mean, run my best runs are always like that, where I just get like ridiculous legendary boon after legendary boon. By
Hmm.
the end, like I'm dishing out so much damage, like bosses are falling within like a few
Yeah.
minutes. And like I've had runs like that with like Mega Satan in the Binding of Isaac too, where like I think my I was I was obsessively playing Binding of Isaac over and over again when I was really sick after first coming to London. And you always get really
Hmm.
sick after first coming to London because you're exposed to
Hmm.
way too much. So I was
Yeah.
like flat out ill, probably with like five different head colds at once or something. Barely able to get out of bed, and I hate not doing anything. So
Yeah, I can't stand it. I
I
can't stand it. I eat myself
yeah,
when I'm in that situation.
so I played games, which isn't a good idea. And I played The Binding of Isaac, and I must have played it just like
Which is
50 times, like just game after game after game. And eventually, I just decided that I really wanted to like combine different electricity stuff. So I just like immediately quit the game if I didn't get an electricity stuff on the first route, um, which is absurd, required like endlessly repetitive runs, but eventually I just got this combination where I would fire and this wave of electricity would just cover the entire room and kill everything, including Mega Satan, like almost like a couple of hits. Um,
Brilliant.
that was the most entertaining run. I really wish I had like recorded that run actually.
They
That
are
was
so rare.
yeah,
They do occur. I mean, you do get them. There are certain combinations where if you can get them, you just fire like this big tear,
yeah.
and it fills the room. It just fills the room and kills
And it's a
everything.
high damage tier as well. Like just
Yeah,
everything immediately dissolves around you. Like it.
phenomenally rare.
I mean, I think at that point, like I had like renewable hearts as well. Not just
Right.
renewable, like in the sense that like between rooms they were renewing, but they were like actively renewing in life. So like I was just basically unkillable and could kill everything instantly.
Yeah,
It's like the most god tier I've ever been with the Binding of
that's
Isaac.
that's what you need for ultra hard.
Yeah.
That's the run you need. I've been trying to do that ultra hard for ages, and I can't do it. It's really
You need
difficult.
to get
It's what it says on the tin.
you need to get incredibly sick so you just don't mine running
Yeah.
runs after mine running runs until you get that luck.
It is
Um,
true. That's what you need. I mean, that's true in Binding of Isaac generally, but in Ultra Hard, it's an absolute law.
mm,
If you don't get like from the first item room, if you don't get a good item, quit.
yeah, yeah,
Quit
that's
and redo the challenge.
yeah. When you get a bean or something.
Joe, beans are out. Beans are completely out. Almost any kind of item that you have to activate is
Oh
out,
yeah,
unless it's something like the dice or something like that.
or a heart generator or something.
Yeah, the Yum Heart is
Yeah,
amazing in
I
Ultra Hard.
I love the book that gives you black hearts. Like that's the most.
the book of oh, which one is
Is
it?
it
That
Belial
one.
or something like
I
that?
can't remember which one it is. The one that gives you the
But you get that with a bunch of things that like decrease the amount of battery you need to activate something and then gives you
oh
extra
yes,
batteries. And
yes,
you basically just got permanent, and then you try and lower your red hearts to one, so you end up
that's
with
it.
like nine red black hearts.
Yeah,
And you could just kill people by letting them hurt you
just
at
by letting them
points.
hurt you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like that's really quite
that's what you
effective.
want. That's definitely what you want. But that's what you need in ultra hard. If you haven't got a heart generator of some description, Book of Revelation, it's the Satanic Bible, that gives
Ah,
you the
yeah,
black hearts. The Yum Heart, Vampire's Kiss, something like that. You're not going to do it.
yeah.
There's just no way of doing it.
It's it's like I've never played the ultra hard version. I'm probably not enough of like a gamer to do it really, unless
I
it's
don't think I'm enough of a
Tetris.
game.
Like
I don't think I'm enough of a gamer to do
I
it, to
guess
be perfectly
I
honest.
guess everyone has like that game, and for me, very sadly, it's Tetris. Like I'm trying to like um achievement complete the Tetris Effect connected stats thing, and I've got like seven left. Some of them are just like really long, like you got to get to level 100, which just means playing thousands
Just
of games
playing,
of
yeah.
Tetris.
Just.
But other of them are like get straight A's in all the effect modes, which means like doing like ridiculous puzzles in like ridiculous speeds and like yeah, it's just but I
Well,
am a bit of an obsessive on that game for weird
I tell you
reasons.
what, Rich, shall we do next up? Shall we do Disco Elysium?
Yes, I would definitely
Shall we talk about
yeah.
Disco Elysium next time round? Because that is
And if you seek
oh, it's
out
so good.
Techno Live, like hit me up
Mm.
on Messenger or something if you need that. There's weird spelling. It's like Texh.
Yeah, could you send me a
Yeah,
message
I'll definitely
just
do
to
that. Yeah.
add brilliance?
Um,
Before we go, is there anything you'd like to pimp out?
um, right now, probably just my website.
Hmm.
The one convenient thing about Twitter was I could send everyone to my pinned tweet, and that had everything.
Ah.
Um, but I don't miss it, to be honest. Um, so rowantree-editing.uk. You can
Hmm.
find most of my links there, to be honest, my page tree, and apparently my Twitter link is still there. I should take that down.
Mm.
YouTube, Instagram, which I have for some reason, uh, and my blog, which is the main thing. Uh,
Of course, links all below, ladies and gentlemen.
hmm,
As for me, ladies and gents, it's the same as per usual. You can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy. Recently had Born in Blood Volume 2 published, which Rowan was very kind enough to review and do a forward for. You can find a lot of my published fiction at perpetualmotionmachinepublications.com and, of course, on the Evil Empire of Amazon
hmm,
.co.uk and .com. Links to all of those over at Strange Playgrounds. And if you do fancy a chat, I still am on Twitter for my sins, and you can find me over there, just throwing nonsense out into the void, usually,
hmm.
which is kind of what Twitter is for.
Yes, yeah, at its
Um,
best.
at its best, yeah. Rowan, thanks so much. That was an
Thank you.
absolute blast.
Yeah,
Absolute blast. Thank you. And thank you guys for listening.
yeah.
Until next time, bye bye.
Bye.